Okay, my name is Mathew Point. My traditional name is Prontuckus. That was given to me from my aunties on my mother's side. It is Thompson River. Originally, my grandma B left a list of names for our family, and then they kind of, after her passing, they kind of just made decisions about who was getting what. I'm from Seabird Island. Grew up there. Periodically moved around Chilliwack. My dad's from Chilliwack. Stqoya, where he grew up. He's also families from Stqoya as well, from Point Side. So my mother is from the Harris family as well as the Hope side, right, out in Yale and Seabird Island. So I guess it kind of bounced around both sides of the family, but mostly Seabird is where I'm from.
Interesting. And how did you get involved in the work that you do today? You started a business. I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, well, so that was I guess it wasn't ever really planned to the detail that I'm doing it, other than recently. So, I mean, it's not like I had a goal, growing up saying that I was, going to run a construction company one day. I guess I've always had a knack for recognizing abilities, even in younger years of when I was working in school and I was kind of mentoring and tutoring my friends and whatnot in different subjects. I realized that they needed to be explained things differently, right? Because I hadn't had to, maybe much like yourself, I kind of was able to pick up material and information from the school system, kind of what was expected of me, right? And so I was able to compete with the other students and kind of like actually going to school mostly off reserve. I had to kind of fit in there as best I could, right? Being from Seabird Island, going to school in Agassiz, right? There's a cultural barrier kind of thing, right? So when I started, actually being able to excel in those areas and subjects, I found myself very competitive, but also realizing some of my friends didn't have the same ability. So I started kind of, even as early as just trying to teach my friends how to tie their shoes. It was just like, what I mean? There's a way that everybody learns it, and then there's a specific way that other people kind of find information. So I kind of always kind of wanted to be that middleman, right? I wanted to, help my friends learn the material their own way, right? Because I think in a lot of ways our people need to be explained differently, right? So I guess when I started the company, I realized that a lot of my friends kind of like they had some certain barriers to excel in trades and different occupations, and I really wanted to kind of give an atmosphere of security, right? Saying like, hey, this is what we're trying out. This is what we want to do. We want to build houses. We want to do this other stuff. Let's create a safe environment for you to learn, right? Or actually, express yourself is probably a better word. So I guess it starts from my desire to kind of give opportunities to people that I grew up with. Because, I grew up with friends that are, struggled in certain areas for various reasons and couldn't apply themselves, right? If they wanted to get a certain job or however, right? There was a lot of, it just wasn't as easy for them, I guess, in different ways, in terms of things weren't explained to them properly, right? I guess in terms of what was acceptable in other ways. Because when I got into the occupation trades and all that other stuff, like it wasn't by choice. I mean, my family members were in it. My dad was a roofer, my brother was in construction, and I just kind of like did it in between going to school. So there wasn't a whole lot of history of me really trying to strive for these things. It was very recent. So starting a company geared towards First Nations, geared towards building homes for First Nations, employing First Nations. It was more or less a pipe dream in a sense, but I knew that I had a knack for recognizing abilities, like I said, and I really strongly believe that our people could actually excel in these areas, be profitable, be sort of multi-skilled, but they just needed the atmosphere and able to achieve these things, and actually somebody to kind of just organize it for them. Right. So it all sort of started back and forth from, my earlier days to what I recognized from my experience in different areas, different trades, right? And so again, it's more complicated than I kind of lead it to be. Is like, oh, I'm going to start something and then hopefully it's going to work, right? And again, when we started talking about my company, it was more or less like it was hard to explain what I'm going for, all right? Because, when you have a business, people's ideas that it has to be profitable. And yes, it does, right? But you also want it to have impact, right? With most people do, right? Like what you're doing here, you're striving to make a difference, right? And in simple terms, because you are obviously getting all the information together. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of organization, right? Like you're setting up the cameras, you have to learn how to do that, and learning all these editorial things, right? Like it's more complicated than you think it is at first, right? But it's to be expected when you start something, I think. But I think I kind of went off with that question, but I think I don't know what I'm doing half the time, in a sense, like, okay, what am I trying to do? Which means it's just not defined yet. I think when we start something, it's really kind of just takes off on its own.
Yeah, your ethos is so different than most construction companies, contracting companies. The mindset is typically in those industries, make money. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you hear about certain tourism businesses, I wear a lot of Tentry, the ethos often matters when you're shopping, when you're buying a product, when you're going into the grocery store and you see, oh, there's this item. You start to think, like, where is this sourced? Is it sourced ethically? Can we have a positive impact on this? Like that is very common in other regards, but it's less common in construction companies. It's less common in multi-million-dollar companies. It's like there's less pressure on them. So the fact that you were willing to take this on and say, how can I do this where I'm not just hiring the bottom of the barrel people, pushing them as much as I can, criticizing them, firing them. I've worked at like landscaping companies, which are somewhat different, but often the mindset is we don't invest anything into you until a year in, because then you're through your probationary phase in that kind of company culture. And yours is very different, which is I'm going to try and find the diamonds in the rough almost. I'm going to try and find those great people who just need time, support, and opportunity. And it's so easy, especially right now, to write people off, to say, is it worth investing in new people? Should we downsize? Is this worth my investment for this person? For you to say, I'm going to take people who haven't been given opportunities before or who have failed in other circumstances and invest in them is something I just find so refreshing. And again, something outside of what the industry norm, I would say, is.
Yeah, honestly, you hit it on the head there. It's not a perfect thing too. I think I've had to, and I explained to my guys, is like my biggest investment is into you. The trucks, the equipment, all that other stuff, all the things that I've built, the tools, like that is replaceable, right? And then so when it comes to my guys, and like I've spent time, energy, thought, all this other stuff, hoping that you're kind of growing a little bit, right? So, and in terms of I try not to put them in a situation where they'll fail, like 100%, but I know that that's always a possibility. I want to say, put them in a situation that's just a little bit too challenging for them, so they'll ask questions, right? And then so it's like they'll lean on each other. That dynamic to create that safe atmosphere is really hard because. I guess this brings me back to the origins of my time in trade, because I also had some years at UFE as well and a couple other experiences. But I always felt I had a lot of anxiety working for those construction companies, framing companies, roofing companies. It was always like you're either here, you're either doing this or you're not, right? Or there was a very low tolerance for what I was allowed to do or allowed to achieve. So there's a lot of pressure. Right. And then the masculine environment, right? It's just like, you're either a man or you're not, right? And you've got a lot of shame and guilt for not coming up short or making mistakes. So now you're hiring guys who are kind of trained, very insecure, right? Like don't want to make mistakes, don't want to admit to the boss that they're going to be late. Like there's a lot of things, a lot of dynamics there, right? So I got a combination of those things, and it's never perfect. So I can't say that. I think with any company, you want your managers, you want your laborers, you want your data input, and you got this puzzle of people that you want around you. So I want young guys, a mixture of young guys mentored with older guys, mentored with different supervisors that sort of understand the philosophy And it's really hard to grasp, for certain employees to grasp that philosophy because it's new. And it's like, why? Because I've never heard it, right? They're never like, no, I'm here to invest in you. This is not because they're only used to hearing monies, dollars, and whatever, right? Figures like that, like, hey, we're going to make this. And that's how you have to explain it to them sometimes. I'm like, I need you to fill out your time cards this way because it costs money if you don't, and I have to explain it like that because or else they'll just switch off when I say like, no, I want you guys to actually kind of input this so you guys are paying attention and you guys are actually having record of what you've done. So you take that home with you. I log that. I read that, right? All the information is all important to me, right? It's an accumulation of data. Are you progressing? Are you paying more attention to this stuff? Are you taking pride in your work, right? Are you documenting how long it took you to do one task? And then obviously like 2 months down the road, it took you half as much time to do the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So these time books are like a record of development. They're like journal entries. You know what I mean? So a lot of guys be like, this is so stupid. Why do we have to write time books? I'm like, because there's a bigger picture here, right? I want to see what you guys are putting into the work, right? But also, again, you can go back and you could reflect on all the hours that you put in, all the tasks that you've done. And it's like, it's sort of, and then you have signatures on them and it's one facet of a bigger picture, right? And so you have to engrave these little things these little structures inside the company that make it much more valuable, right? So, and it's not so much like, and again, I always have to bring it back to money or else they won't pay attention. I'm like, no, I'm developing these systems in order for you to kind of like, regulate where you're going, because everybody, I feel, especially even men in our culture and our communities, need to feel like they're making a difference, need to feel like they're actually, serving their masculine duties, right, kind of thing. So, and it's good to track these things, right, because easy come, easy go kind of thing is the philosophy that we've kind of grew up with. But no, I want you to have a track record of where you went, say this is, and again, payroll was a big thing for me because I wanted them to have a record of finances. I want them to look back in their past year and say, how much money did I make? What did I do with that? Reflect on those things, right? Because a lot of these guys were getting paid under the table, right? And who knows how much they were, other than their bank statements, they had no idea how much they made last year, right? So I'm like, now I wanted to kind of get them to think about these things, right? So rather than thinking about it daily or bi-weekly, they're thinking of it yearly, right? They're taking themselves out of the survival mode tactic kind of thing, right? So
that's really interesting because you think about how much money somebody makes in a year and how much goes towards food, how much goes towards, I don't know, I think when most people play video games now, how much goes towards that? How much are you investing in vices like alcohol, in drugs, in things that help you cope with your day to day? There's all these different ways of spending your money. And again, if you're working for a big organization, they might say, hey, have you thought about RRSPs? Have you thought about investing? Have you thought about saving your money? Have you thought about your retirement plan? What is that process? We do that to a significantly less degree with individuals doing hard labor. And the one thing that people need to understand is how often unfair it is that the people who often work the hardest yield the least fruit from their efforts. Like you think of berry pickers. They make the least out of all of us. They make less than minimum wage oftentimes. They're working hot sun, no shade, long days, and then they're just brought from one field to the next field. And then they go back to their home country, often Mexico, and nobody gives them a huge thank you from Canada that they did that whole trip to take care of their family. We don't care. Yet people sitting in offices often were like, are you stressed? Do you have techno stress? What's going on? Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should stay home. It's been a stressful time. We don't want you to get burnout. But the people building houses, building real things that we live in, we don't worry about to the same extent. We don't think about whether or not they have a retirement plan. We don't think about whether or not they're well and taken care of, because there's such a disconnect, in my opinion, between the everyday worker and the tradesperson. There's a different culture there that I feel like is significantly separated. So we're not able to communicate with them our gratitude when they do hard labor things. And then that manifests in no discussions about pension plans, no discussion about opportunities to climb up, opportunities to become a leader. Like we don't always view them like that because they're often doing the heavy labor stuff that often we don't want to do.
Yeah, there's definitely like a, being taken for granted kind of thing, of philosophy, because, you move into your house after it's built, right? And you don't see and again, there's this theory behind it all. it's very underappreciated, the type of work that these men are basically killing themselves to, get there to work 12-hour days, right? And then very underappreciated in a lot of ways. And also, again, there's just no time to talk about it. Like, so that's what I realized is that, because we're on the job, we're on the clock, we're doing these things. Where do we have a time to sit down and talk, right? So I'm like, okay, you have to do it on the outside the truck or in the truck or whatever, right? Like, and these toolbox things. And because if you're in an office, you're in this atmosphere, it's designed for you to have meeting space, right? And when you're on site, things are going on. You don't feel like you could connect with somebody, right? When there's so many things going on around you, and time of the essence, and things are, being built, and and there's all these other things. So it's not. And I can, like with certain people, like, hey, you got 10 minutes to talk, let's chat things up. I know I've had meetings with employees and coworkers. I typically like to say guys I work with. And then it's where it's like, hey, can you meet me here? Let's have a chat, 30 minutes. Like, let's just see where you're at, right? Like, what your intentions are. But yeah, it's really undervalued in a lot of ways. And we rely on it heavily. Like, okay, say if, the building next to you doesn't get built, like, that's huge. That's a huge impact on the economy, on everything, right? And these guys, aren't being taught, like the what's going to happen next, right? Like, after this job, like, are you investing appropriately, right? Are you taking care of yourself physically, emotionally? Like, they're not necessarily things that are talked about, but they're starting to, I feel. And just for our people, though, in general, like, we're not trained to talk about how we feel, right? In most times. And like, trades is a huge area for the men in First Nations communities, because that's basically what we're used to living with the land, used to using our hands, all that kind of stuff, right? That is natural for us. And so, and this is my main focus too, was starting this company. I was like, okay, and I took it a little personally, because the men of our communities need to be starting to develop, like, more intuition of where they're at, in a sense of where they are emotionally, physically, mentally, all those other things, because nobody asks them, right? And not only that, then they're expected not to share these things in their circle. So my idea was, if I can grab these maybe undervalued men, kind of give them an opportunity to better themselves, and they take that home with their families, right? To their families, like, all of a sudden I made a difference in the world. All of a sudden I did this, I built this, I'm getting promoted, or I'm doing, making a difference, I'm making an impact. All of a sudden they feel better about themselves, and they go home and they share that feeling with their family, right? And all of a sudden their families are feeling better, right? Because these are the ones supporting their families with whatever occupation most of the time. And I just feel like if I can invest in, this little pocket, this population of the communities, it will actually, it'll blossom into bigger things. Like, in a sense, like, the health of the community will go up, because a lot of these tradesmen are, obviously, like you mentioned, have alcohol and drug addiction, possibly, right? And it's just like, go to work, then go, feel miserable at work, go back to home, and then domestic violence, whatever happens, all those things that go on, and like, just unhealthy habits of, kind of like survival mode with tactics, right? And so my big idea was that hopefully that, it could create an environment where, these guys can develop their skills, right? And actually develop their thinking strategies, right? And all of a sudden start thinking about finances, because if you have, so what is the statistic? If you have if you make $60,000 a year, your life doesn't improve or whatever. Like, that's pretty much like a safe area for people in Canada or wherever, right?
Yeah, your happiness level doesn't increase much beyond that.
Yeah. And sometimes more money actually creates more problems in terms of it depending on where you're at in life. Like, it exaggerates where you're at. Like, say if you're miserable, it'll make it worse, right? Like, so drug and alcohol come into consideration. You have extra money to spend on those things, then it'll make your life worse. But if you're feeling good, you're embracing, you're giving, you're supporting, then maybe it will actually exaggerate those types of things too. So, and so hopefully when somebody gets to that point of they're creating more revenue, that they're not sabotaging themselves too, right? So it's like having that balance, is that road to survival, in a sense, like, okay, now I'm useful. Okay, now I have a direction. Now I'm making an impact. Now I'm making more money. Okay, can I manage it? Is it not going to sabotage me? Because that one theory is like, like, how do you kill an Indian or whatever in a population or whatever? It's like, well, you just dump a bunch of money, which has happened in a lot of communities across, other provinces. It's like they've made tons of, they've been registered a lot of different money, and it just creates gang mentality, it creates more suicidal, statistics, all that stuff, right? So in terms of like, you can't really solve people's problems by paying them more. It really just exaggerates their underlying issues. So you're hoping that by the time that they're able to become comfortable earners, that they can manage it and they're not going to just kind of harm themselves with it. So that was always a real kind of challenge for me. I'm like, okay, I've brought a guy in, I'm paying him more. But then all of a sudden his life got worse for a second, right? And it was just like, I'm supporting the problem in some way. So I got really kind of hard on myself for it. I'm like, okay, now I have to take a step back and reevaluate. So it's each employee kind of has their own sort of challenges, right? So you have to really understand and be vocal about it and be like, okay, well, and I have to share this with them, each of them. I was like, I'm not so much, this company is all about you guys. It's all about, what we can do to develop each other's lives. If your quality of life's not getting better working here, then I really don't feel like you need to be here, right? And that's it's the big picture thing. So it's like, and I realize this now because I jumped from 0 to 100, hired 15 to 20 guys, and I was like working, got all these projects, things were going okay. Then problems came, right? So then I'm like, okay, I got to start microing a little some of this stuff. And so started realizing I was really not focusing on the people too much, like the employees. I'm like, I got to make sure the guys are strong enough to handle this responsibility, right? Because a lot of them have the skill, a lot of them don't know how to manage it, right? And it's also like, if you give them too much pride, they'll run away with it. And then all of a sudden pride equals what do you call it? Self-sabotaging sometimes. If you got too much pride, and you will definitely you will not ask questions. You will not share your challenges, right? So it's about regulating. It's like you want to instill pride, but in a safe amount, I guess, in terms of, where they're at. I guess it's like, some people who are very secure and stable in their lives, they appreciate compliments, acknowledgements, but it's not something they thrive on. Right. It's not something that they like, hopefully I need that or else I'm going to feel depressed. It's like, great, thanks, appreciate the acknowledgement, handshake, move on. Right. Where some of these guys just like, they thrive off it. And then it was almost like, and then it gets in their way. It's like, oh no, so a mistake will just totally sabotage their confidence. So they won't mention, certain things. And so I've come into different scenarios. Right. So, ego is obviously, for a really sensitive topic for a lot of people, right? And what are you doing? These like pride and ego is basically, it costs a lot of money in some ways. And again, we go back to the money thing, but that's how I have to relate it to it. It's like, because as soon as you stop asking questions, as soon as you stop communicating because your pride's keeping you in isolation, right, or whatever it may be, then things just kind of go sideways, right, for a lot of reasons, for a lot of people, right? They stop being curious and they start being more fearful. Right. And it's like maintaining that right side of the brain for like curiosity and empathy and all that stuff. Right. And then the other left brain is all like, fear driven stuff. Right. So keeping people in a safe atmosphere is super good for business and super good for, our intentions. Right. Because people need to feel good at what they're doing, but also be accountable. Right. Like accountability shouldn't be scary. It's hopefully instilling the desire to, I want to thrive to be corrected in some ways, right? You know what I mean? Like you mentioned earlier, like, oh yeah, I made mistakes. I'm like, that's a great attitude. Like, yeah, because we're always going to make mistakes. Hopefully, right? Or else what are we doing? We're just staying in one place, right? I always feel that way. Like I hope I'm making decisions in order to be corrected, right? Because, if I'm always just doing the same thing over and over, then it's like not going anywhere. I'm just kind of going in circles, like just completing tasks similarly, right? Like a robot. So, I think being human is always constantly learning and growing and developing. So that's what I try to say that with not being too, grandiose about it to the guys, because they're just like, what are you doing again? He's going off a tangent, right? So it's like little things, little bits at a time, right? Like, I can't sit down for 3 hours and have a, interview with a lot of the guys, but there's parts and opportunities each day. You can kind of share the little things and help motivate them and also correct them. It's really hard to correct people sometimes, right? Because, as soon as we feel threatened, like our security, our confidence, and all of a sudden we like cave and then we want to give up. Right.
Especially when there's something there that you can see, like if you make like a birdhouse and it's a bad birdhouse and it's like nobody can live in this birdhouse. Like there's when a child shows you something and goes like, hey, what do you think? And you're like, that's great. Like you don't want to just be like, oh, well, that's not useful. We're not putting that on the fridge. Like you don't say that. You want to make sure that it's a constructive comment, that you're showing support and that you're also encouraging them to improve and not saying this is perfect, because maybe there are areas of improvement. That greater why seems to be a challenge that we're not very good at. Like as a native court worker, I'll work with someone and we'll talk about going to detox or treatment or recovery. And we forget to ask the greater why a lot of the time. Like, why would you want to be clean? Why would you want to have a healthy life? Why would you want to have a stable job? Like, what is all of these little pieces in your life building towards? Well, imagine what you want your house to look like. You want to be able to come home, have maybe a long day of work, but then your partner, your spouse, greets you and says like, "It's so grateful you're home. We have like a fresh casserole in the oven. It'll be ready in about 5 minutes. Don't stress too much. The kids are already playing." You want to come home to a healthy environment. That is the long-term goal. You want to be able to make traditions, have family recipes at Thanksgiving or Christmas or whenever your celebrations are. You want to be able to feel warmth when you come home and loved and valued. We all want that. And so going to that greater why, it seems like we're not always great at. We're like, well, go get the treatment, then we'll talk about it. Or go do this, then we'll talk about it. And then you can think about that. And we so often miss out on the fact that these are really people's lives that you're having a small piece in improving for the better or for the worse.
Yeah, I have a hard time actually setting that boundary. Like, how far can I go in getting involved with these guys' lives, right? Because I mean, honestly, I get a little bit codependent with it. I'm like, oh God. So I get disappointed because it's not so much that you cost, the company a lot of money. It's the fact that you kind of made a decision that really harmed yourself. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because like, again, my investment is like, I'm really hoping, and I'm really hoping that when we make these decisions to kind of give people opportunities that, that they take it in with a grain of salt, and that, that in the end of the shift that they feel pretty good about it, and they're not like, okay, dreading the next day kind of thing. Right. So, and it's about being open and honest about, maybe at the start, like my flaws, shortcomings, those things, right? And so again, when we're correcting people, it's good to set the table, right? Like, so, and I always forget this because I get caught, and like you said, the why stuff, and then like I get caught looking at the day-to-day stuff. I'm like, oh shit, because it's so easy. You look at this, a wall of photos, and then one looks out of place. You're only going to focus on that one, right? This, and I was like, oh, it looks like a funny photo. It shouldn't be there. You want to pull it off, fix it, right? That's all you're going to focus on. So, and then my biggest struggle is that I'm like, okay, every time that I make a correction, I have to say two good things first, right? Hey, great, thanks for being on time. Hey, that corner looks really good, right? Like, fantastic. And then, but hey, what do you think about this, right? Ask them, give them a chance to kind of like evaluate their homework, because you get lost in it. Honestly, with anything you do, you're writing a book, you're spending 3 or 4 hours, whatever, at a time on it. And then you just get lost in it. And you forget about, what was I doing again, right? And then all of a sudden, like, the quality kind of goes down because you're just kind of entrenched. It's like you're in the eye of the storm, right? And so all of a sudden, all these things are going on around you. Say, you're painting a wall 3 hours at a time. You miss a corner because like you're just going on and on and on, right? So so there's bound to be corrections with things, and there's just, and it's helped to have an outside perspective with it, right? Like somebody they call them quality control, right? I mean, so you have a supervisor, manager, whoever come in, it's like, oh, hey man, did you miss that? Yeah, okay, sweet, thanks, fix it, or whatever, I'll fix it. Some of the other, right? So, and again, it's just like incrementally getting better, and I think that's a really solid philosophy for life. I mean, it's just like incrementally getting better each day. Like if you wake up, with a curiosity, like, hey, I wonder what I'm going to learn today. Hey, I wonder what's going to challenge me today. Like this whole, even the setup here, this podcast, it was like, oh, this is kind of really making me a little nervous, but it's going to be fun, right? Look at it as curiosity, fun, and excitement, right? And that will help ease the anxiety and the tension. It's like, whatever happens. Whatever I say, and nothing's going to be perfect. And on to the next one, right? Like those little things. And, because I really, admire when you set this thing up. Like you started 100 odd people ago, right? And it was just like, one person at a time, and it'll take off when it takes off. And it did. And people recognize you and understand the work that you're doing. Like it's just underlying commitment and consistency to the bigger picture, right? Like you said, find that why. I like that, like whole Simon Sinek kind of book that he wrote on it, right?
Right. And,
another great person to kind of like just take all this information from, because he's interviewed and talked to millions of hundreds of thousands of people kind of thing, right? Have access to people is huge. And I realized like when I started the whole thing, I was like, I'm going to need time to get information together, right? It's not like I came into this thing, I had an idea, right? I want to create this thing I just want to see what happens. I need the information. I need the data. And that's why, again, the time cards thing was important to me, because I wanted to see where everybody's level was at. Reading, writing, accountability, all these different things. Like, I had all these assumptions from just developing from different books and stuff like that. And then I had, these philosophies, but I didn't put them into practice, right? Because I spent some time in politics, and I was just like, well, I was preaching all these suggestions, like, right to the table and all that, and in other terms, it wasn't really going anywhere because I didn't have any factual evidence on it, right? It was just all theories. And so when I started this company, I was like, well, let's put these theories to the test. Let's try to create this environment. Let's try to create dialogue back and forth, because any good decision is created with tons of dialogue, right? Like, the more people have input, the better it is. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just like, it's the balance of input, right? Like, so, say if you're like, hey, everybody decides, votes, should we drive on the left side of the road or the right? Either side doesn't matter, right? Like, it's you could drive on the left or the right. It's just what's right is whatever we vote on, right? Like, the democracy mentality, right? So I like the fact that the more people that have weigh in on a subject, the more accurate it is, obviously, right? So, and I have to remember that too, even just talking about it, because I'm not at each project that I have. I could have 5 or 6 projects going on at the same time. And I take my best intuition from where I'm at, right? And then I have to get the guys together and talk about it. And like, I hope you guys are talking about the problems and the solutions, right? And then, have people just conversely, because, the more people that weigh in on a subject, the better, right? Because we all have our own life experiences, our own work experiences, all these different things, these problem solving tactics, share those. Right. And then so I've always really recognized the fact that I need help constantly to make these things happen. Right. I can't do everything. I don't have all the answers. Again, I just have, hopefully, some skill at delegating the responsibilities to other people. Right. Having that intuition, recognizing, what people need, and actually asking the right questions. Huge thing. You're learning how to ask the right questions. Right. And when you're really good at it, obviously, you kind of, you hit things right where they're supposed to be focused on. And then, and again, it's all just, I knew I came into this not taking it personally, right? And going into it with that why, like you said, staying focused on the vision is super hard, because you get entrenched in numbers and, statistics. You get, missed days or whatever, where certain things come in your way, and then you forget, what did I start this for? What was I doing again, right? Keeping that why and focus front center stage, right? And then all of a sudden your decision-making gets a lot better. But as soon as you start looking at all the negatives, you kind of feel like you have to fix them. And it's like, a lot of it kind of oddly, if you have the right mindset, just kind of takes care of itself in some ways, right? Like, if you stay positive, because I've made mistakes, tons of mistakes, like in ways that I've kind of strategize how to correct things, right? To improve quality. I'm like, okay, do I do what I was taught, or do I still practice my own philosophy? So honestly, I've had mixed results. Like, I don't like to be that sort of dictator, sort of these things, this is the rules. And I don't want to have to create contracts and policies and all these stuff as much as I feel necessary. I feel like, being respectful and understanding goes a long way, right? And there does need to be defined solutions for certain areas in your business, right? So people will obviously rely on policy, but I think you could really run people ragged with policy, right? And all of a sudden they're afraid to move. They're afraid to really offer suggestions. They think policies are laws, and they're just suggestions and guidelines, right? Yeah. And so, and again, I've had a really free spirited way of developing it, and now we're starting to step into different roads. Like, okay, well, you guys know what the rules are. You know what the consequences are. You guys babysit yourself. You know what I mean? Like, hold yourself accountable to these things that we've all agreed upon. You've signed the contract. You know what the guidelines are. If you're sort of being, because again, as you mentioned, dealing with guys that, are all different areas of life. Some guys, maybe have different challenges, right? Like, some people, a lot of them don't really drink that much, but some of them do. And I don't disregard it. It's like, yeah, responsibly, whatever. If you can make it to work, you have things you have to attain for. I don't criticize it, whatever. I've had my history with it, and I want to make sure that you guys are aware of what the rules are, because I know that if I enable those behaviors, it's not really getting them anywhere too, right? And so, but also I have to remember to kind of have empathy, use the right side of my brain, curiosity. Those are the biggest things when coming into disciplinary actions. I'm like, understanding why your workers are doing these things, right? Like, I've had scenarios where I've had vehicles impounded. I've had, different things, and, careless people, things breaking down, losing, stuff like that, like things that cost a lot of money. And I was just like, wasn't so concerned about the money, like I mentioned. It was just like, well, I wonder what's going on, right? I should check in. And that is, you try to take as much ownership as you possibly can in those situations. Like, okay, I wasn't checking in with this guy. I felt like something was going wrong, but I kind of ignored it, right? So, I mean, and that's where you can kind of start like, okay, opportunity to change my actions, right? What do I have control over? Myself, right? I don't have control of much else other than, the situation that I'm in, right? So, again, those checkpoints are really important for me to kind of really reevaluate and strategize how to communicate better, because, everything's communication when it comes down to, trying to get a job done, getting a point across in terms of, okay, well, who has, who's got the most valuable input in this point, right? But also, like, how is everybody feeling? Because you're always thinking about morale. You're thinking about, security. You're thinking about, okay, because I've been there. I've had employers that look at me like I can tell when you're having a bad day, like a mile away across the site kind of thing, right? And they've had given me time to breathe, right? Like when I made a decision to just like quit drinking altogether, and like they're like, okay, there's gonna be tough days, and right, and that's when things really changed for me. And then I was like, yeah, and I appreciated those, right? Having a mentor that was like, okay, do it, take your time. I know we got millions of dollars of machines we're roaming around here, but go ahead, take your time and go do your thing, right? Reevaluate, come back. That was huge, right? So I want to also come to that approach too, like. But it's hard because I think my biggest, I guess if I was going to define my job, it's like I have to figure out what everybody wants without them telling me, right? And a lot of the time, right? And reading those cues, really understanding where they're coming from, and wondering why they're doing the things they do, right? Because, at the end of the day, it's like, are you enjoying yourself? People aren't enjoying themselves, and they're not going to stick around, right? Or they're not going to really apply themselves, right? Or they're going to get resentful. And I got to remember that too. I'm like, okay, well, I can't really overwhelm certain people either, right? Some people like a challenge, but some people are like, no, I just like to kind of plug in, plug out kind of thing, right? Those types of things. But
yeah, the big comment that you just made is it's like so many organizations have endless amounts of policies, but policies should be embodied by someone. And it sounds like they're embodied by you. Like you have to act them out in order for them to be true. Like how many times do people have on their website, like our mission statement, our values, and then you read it and you kind of go, like, sure. Like, cause everybody puts integrity, community, like honest, like all these things. And it's like, who in the company embodies that? And that's supposed to be the CEO, the founder, the creator. They're supposed to embody it. And then it makes sense to people because then they see it and they go, that's why that's there. But so many times we put in what we think is correct, what somebody in a book told us, without understanding like the circumstances in which this would be applied, in which this would be useful to somebody to actually understand. And so often we are in our own world, we don't appreciate the trials and tribulations people go through. And we've developed this culture of like, keep home life problems at home and put on your work hat. And particularly with Indigenous communities, we know that that's an extra challenge because the challenges are often far greater. Like as a court worker, I get to see domestic violence charges, sexual assault charges, different problems than I see from other community members. And there's no comparison that the drug crimes are often perpetrated by non-Indigenous people. But the challenges within Indigenous communities is like these people go home at the end of the day to the people that they hurt, to the community that they hurt. And mending these relationships, the topic of reconciliation is such a challenge because so many people are at different stages in that conversation. Some aren't even ready for that topic to come up yet because they're still so entrenched in like negativity. And I try and explain to people, like you think of somebody who attended Indian residential school and was given all the worst tools on how to deal with problems. And then they had children and they passed on all their terrible tools to their children. And then now we have people like you and I who are like likely that third generation of people who are now removed from the trauma, but we still see like, I don't have family recipes. We don't have family traditions we've practiced for 60 years, 70 years, where it's just every year we do these type of potatoes, this type of thing. And that means a lot to people. Like, a lot of people joke about like pumpkin spice lattes, but that becomes a cultural tradition that everybody recognizes, and they go, fall this. And that means something to us. There's a reason people take photos of it and are proud of it. There's a reason people get excited about their Christmas trees. It's because these are the times where the stress of life, the problems in the world, all those things fade away, and it's what's at home. It's where you're loved and valued. It's where that enjoyment comes in, where those other problems can fade away. And for so many people, it's like you go home and you haven't learned how to greet your wife at the end of the day. You don't know how to do that, because some people come home and their boss just got mad at them, and then they come home and they take that out on their wife, and they go, oh, why isn't this room clean? Why isn't that like this? And then it's like, okay, this isn't fruitful. Like, this is pushing you both in the wrong direction, because her response is going to be, well, you did this wrong, and why didn't you do that? And why isn't the car repaired, or whatever the problems are? Now you're just in a fight, and your bad day at work just manifested itself at home. Like, the tools of how to come home, how to show the person you love that you love them is so important. Because the one thing I've learned a lot through this is, like, I take on different levels of stress and problems and try and solve things. The thing I hate the most is the person who often gets the worst brunt of my stupidity, my short-sighted comment, is the person who's the most supportive of me, the person who's there at 11 o'clock at night when I'm still editing a podcast or something, and then I say something sassy or rude to her, and she's like, hey, I've been here the whole time trying to support you, and what, now I get this? And it's like, that's not fair, but that's so often the case for people.
Yeah, actually, that kind of brings up another point. I was, and that's the idea with, like, I kind of hope that I offer something to these guys that they can, have a good feeling about what they've done throughout the day. And I've had, situations where some people aren't, right? They're kind of faking it till they make it. And honestly, it's like, it's not worth living dishonest. You want to move ahead in the world. Honesty is your main thing, right? And so, and it's not so easy to do some of the times, right? Like, you kind of like, am I able to take criticism today? Am I able to, accept my my failures with a strong heart, kind of thing? And it's nothing's ever completely failed. And that's what I love about construction. Like, and I said it to the guys, I'm like, I say this, and I'm like, okay, no matter what happens, like, if we do good or not, we could redo it. Like, that's the industry we're in, right? Like, we can just take it down and redo it again, like, no problem. And I've had to do that, like, in several projects. And I'm hoping that some people had, like, the understanding, like, yeah, I'm like, don't worry, at no cost to you will this ever be, like, I have these guys, they're going to do this project. If it doesn't work, we'll redo it free of charge, right? Like, that's the idea. So, my risk it's always been my risk on everything that I've tried, because this is technically my experiment, right? Like, so I'm like, this is something that I'm like just kind of trying, which I think all of us, like yourself, like, you try these things and you hope it works out, and, you learn along the way. But that determination to say, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep going. Like, no matter if I fire these people or whatever goes on, if they leave. One thing is, I don't chase guys too much. I try to understand them, but sometimes people just decide they, it's not good for them. And it's like, okay, that's good. That's your decision. I hope this was a stepping stone to better things, right? And so, and that's what I think too, is everything in this industry is repairable, right? And to a certain extent, and it just costs money, right? They're objects, they're houses, they're these things. If we do a window and it leaks, we just take it out and redo it again. Like, that's beautiful about it, right? It's like, it's at no real inconvenience to anybody else, but just it costs money. That's it, right? And so, but I always feel like, our failures have taught us the biggest lessons, right? And that's the commonality between, in any industry, right? Like, you learn significantly more from your failures than you do your successes, right? It's like, hey, if I go and I hire 3 guys to go build a house, and then it's done in 3 months, I'm like, and I didn't hear anything about it, like, I would learn nothing. Like, I just know that those 3 guys can build a house. But, if I hire 3 guys to go side a house and it goes sideways, like, I'm like, wow. And all of a sudden I have to learn where all these mistakes went. So then all of a sudden I've accumulated all this information. And again, I talked to the guys too. I'm like, wow, I just know a lot more. That was a big, expensive mistake, but I've gained a crap ton of knowledge, about it, right? So I don't ever waste a tragedy, in a lot of ways. And I think that's really huge, because, and it's good energy, right? Like, because obviously if things are going exactly the way that you predicted, you're never really going to challenge yourself. You're like, today went exactly the way I anticipated. So, and it's like, if life went exactly the way you wanted to all the time, I mean, what's the point? Right? It's like, so everybody loves a story. And so I realized too, is like, it's like, you want to be part of a story, right? This journey that you're doing. And so, I mean, I'm hoping that, whatever, if this is a chapter in Guy's life, or if it's the center, focal point of their lives, fantastic, right? To be a part of it, like you said, a small part of like a bigger picture. And because work is important, like I think about it, like I grew up with the work ethic, from my dad and my mom. It was like work, 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 right? Like that's how I impressed my dad. It's like that I could work really hard, that I could lift things, like do this, right? And the schooling thing didn't really impress him whatsoever, right? Because I had a knack for schooling and stuff. But in soccer and stuff, those things, it was the old school mentality, right? Like, oh, because he was a roofer and for a number of years and different things. He was a logger as well, and all that. So that was how I would impress him, right? If I could work 10 hours that day lifting and like just sweating my ass off, really, it was like that was how you got established pride from your father in that way, right? So I mean the whole education thing, when I told him, I was like, oh, I would like to go to med school one day, and he's like, his first thing was like, I don't need a doctor, I need a lawyer. You know what I mean? Because he's dealing with certain charges at the time or whatever it was, right? His prohibitions and all that, right? And he was a pretty avid drinker, but so a lot of that also really the kind of the deeper meaning of it all is like, I know that it hits home pretty close because my dad, I feel, was probably like always in that mode of really kind of doing these occupations and didn't feel fulfilled particularly. It wasn't until he started doing his own thing, like fishing was his biggest thing, right? He felt like he was in control out there, and he was good, and all of this stuff. And it was kind of like, it also was mixed with the partying kind of thing too. And, but it's just, you find you want to give people opportunities to feel impactful. You want them to express themselves in ways. And I like I like guys that, don't say no. You know what I mean? They're like, I hire guys on, say, as a framer, but then I'm going to ask them to do some drywall or something. And I'm like, I don't do that much. I'm a framer. I'm like, is that all? Not to undermine framers. They're very, very complicated,
but open-minded.
Yeah, like how about we were builders, right? And that's why I don't actually give titles to my guys. I just call them tradesmen, because you're probably going to do tons of different things, because that's what we have the capacity to. So when I strategically hire people, it's like, okay, this, you're a plumber, you're a framer, you're this. Put them all together. You guys are home builders now, right? You know what I mean? So you can't put the combination of people together, right? And you're no longer just one thing. You're three things, right? Yeah. Or whatever, four things, whatever it is. But they also too, it's like you have to realize you have to create an area where they can communicate amongst each other. Titles separate people. So as soon as you say that one of them, hey, the framer's the foreman, then the other guys won't speak, right? So then it's like, no, you guys. And this is where you have to do it, kind of tear down the hierarchy. It's like, okay, well, nobody's got a title here. You just have people that talk amongst each other. These, certain people have responsibilities, and we all have. Nobody's higher or lower than each other. We just have different jobs. It's hard to really I always have to repeat that. I'm like, I'm not your boss or whatever. I just have different responsibilities than you, right? Like we're all trying to do the same thing. We're just all necessary in different ways, right? But again, when you were talking about being that hub of your vision or your philosophy or whatever, the mission statement, it's really hard to show that to a crew of guys that maybe only see you a few times a day or whatever, right? Because if you have multiple crews and sites everywhere, you can't really be there alongside them doing the work all the time, right? There's so much going on, and there's other things, and I have to manage, and I have to go back to the office and work with admin team, different things, right? And there's payroll every 2 weeks, and there's all these different things going on. You're kind of just putting out fire, and they don't see that, so it's it's kind of unfortunate that I don't. And I was hoping to be able to develop the systems, long enough where that I could eventually just kind of be able to go there and spend half a day going doing the work with the guys, go work inside the house or go frame. I like doing those things, right? And that's what we kind of aspire to do. It's like, I enjoy it. It's like, say if, whatever hobby you have, if you build a dog house, you just kind of get lost in it. You just kind of sit there and you're building this thing, you're creating something out of nothing, and in a lot of ways, right? And that's the kick that guys get in this industry. It's like, I just made this ugly thing turn into something really nice, and you feel very rewarding after, right? And they hold on to that and like on to the next. And the exchange for me and them right now is just mostly finances, right? Like I pay them to do a job, but I think you have to really instill this belief in your guys, is to say, like, no, the exchange is then giving you an opportunity to express yourself, right? And giving you an opportunity to push yourself, challenge yourself, right? And, and then, I got to organize the fleet of vehicles. I got to organize all the finances and management and all that other stuff. And then, the interviews and meetings with different, clients. But, You know, it's like when you're there at work, you get to do what you like doing. And I hope that's kind of what I try to pass on. I'm like, I hope you like what you're doing. Because then, like, I don't have to watch over you. I have to check if you're taking breaks regularly or whatever, right? It's like, you know, it's like the work will take care of itself, right? You instill that desire and that passion for the work, then it's just like you just kind of like hands off, you know, and just like kind of know that it's just going to go the way it is and things are going to get done because I guess I have a lot of faith in it, right? Because over time, you know, you separate the wheat from the chaff kind of thing, like the cream rise above or whatever that whole saying goes. Yeah. And it's happened, you know, several times. I'm like, okay, well, you know, things were going well here. I don't, you know, and I tell them, I was like, if you don't see me, that means things are going well. You know what I mean? In some ways. And I do hope that I can show up a little bit more. Cause sometimes like if I'm driving to like Skowlitz or Swally, like, and then I got to go to Surrey, it's like, you know, within a day of taking 2 trips, you're like, okay, I can only got, you know, a certain amount of time to really acknowledge and kind of sit there and appreciate the guys, right? In several crews, and you're always trying to remember like where you've spent your time. Like, oh, I haven't checked in with Frank in a long time. I should go check him out. Right? You know what I mean? Like, make sure he's still kind of on a good chapter, right? Or else he could be kind of mustering around with something and not really saying anything, right? So,
yeah, that investment in people, that kind of mindset. I was just listening to an interview with Lex Friedman and a CIA, past CIA operative.
Chris Voss.
No, okay. Robert something, I think. Okay. But he was basically talking about the idea that great leaders don't have to say a lot. A lot of it becomes a myth, like a story that other people tell, an understanding of like, do you know how hard that person works? And you don't answer those questions. How hard do you work? How much time do you put in? How many fires do you put out? It becomes with your inner echelon of people you speak with daily. They give some inkling over time to the staff of how much you're doing. And then it becomes like a philosophy, like we don't know how hard he's working. But when you're constantly putting out that that's your mission, that's your value, other people catch wind of it. And then it becomes like say one of your managers goes like, oh, like Matt's not going to like it if you're doing that. Like it becomes something you don't even have to say. You don't even have to remind anyone. But over time, people start to understand that this is what is valued most in this organization. That the people who end up being the managers are the people exactly who fit your value statements, the things you want to bring about. And it takes time and it takes small conversations you'll never be a part of. But that's what starts to grow is whispers of like, oh, why do you think he moved up? Well, he was really good to this person and he always cared about the staff. And then they go, oh, that's what's valued here. It's not always through big speeches to 50 people, big conferences. It's often what the underlying implied understanding is that you're selecting these people and why. And then when those whys get out to people, that's where they go, this is maybe where I want to go. This is how I want to approach it then, because this is what's being valued. The challenge other organizations have is there is no why. So it's like, oh, you do the work as fast as you can. So those are the people who climb up. And then when that becomes a culture and you know you're never going to be the fastest person, then what the hell am I doing here? Why am I going to care what anybody thinks? And so I think that develops over time, but it's still through the decisions you make of who you support, who you invest more in. Why is this person getting more support? Well, they're trying really hard and they just fell down and he wants to see them develop. Like all of that is going to happen, I think, over time.
Yeah, honestly, you had it because I know now, like I only got, you know, if the company gets bigger, like I mentioned, if, you know, I've had, you know, I think the most 21 or 22 guys on payroll at one time, and that was just way too much, just at where we were at with the projects that we had going on. But I mean, now it's just like, okay, before I get to, if it goes to that again, and I'm not too sure what direction I want to go in, depending on the amount of work that comes at us, that I have to prepare my managers. Again, like you said, the project managers like, okay, you know what the target is, right? You know, and this is how we implement it. All right, communicate with me because I only have time to talk to maybe 3 of these guys per day, right? Or else I'm like going to each guy, right? So, and I was like, you have to kind of echo what the idea is here. And I think a lot of them get it. And I really wanted to stay on the positive of things. Because nobody likes, because, you know, I grew up as an anxious person kind of thing, right? Nobody likes to work in fear, right? And that's a really kind of unproductive tactic to do to motivate people. Like, hey, you know, you rather work this hard or you're going to get fired. Like, that's like, oh, I'm doing this out of like, you know, like fear-based, you know, energy. And it's just not great. When you kind of doing it off, you know, self-propelled, motivated, sort of like high purposeful, you know, energy, then that's great. That just takes care of itself. It pumps the tires constantly. it keeps the wheels turning. And, I think it's like everybody's got the ability to do it. But they also, again, it is up to the kind of the manners of the people just above them, kind of checking in and making sure they're creating a good, safe atmosphere, and, and keeping the dialogue open and stuff like that. Like, hey, what do you think? Like, your opinions matter. Because I'm here setting up the job or whatever, but you're the one actually doing the work. What do you see, right? I need that information, right? Like, what, because again, what we developed in this company is more of like, it was a research thing. Like, I want to know what's going on with these houses. Like, what do you guys find? Like, because there's no real person that's really being the voice of, hey, I just renovated 40 houses, let's say 10 houses or whatever. These were all the issue, right? And so let's kind of like narrow it down, and let's figure out ways to actually, instead of just throwing a bunch of money at it, let's plan for the future, right? Let's actually kind of make sure these problems don't happen again. And there's not enough research around it. Like, for contractors to come in, do the work, collect their paycheck, and leave. It's like, no, I want to stay here, right? I want to kind of build these houses. I want to stay and make sure what's going on. And there was so many interesting things that happened throughout this past year. A lot of different like mental benefits of actually kind of. So I did siding to this one house, and right away the family started. So it was like a 40-year-old house, and it was wood paneling and all that stuff. It was really like an old color. Paint was coming off. I redid the whole siding to vinyl. They started planting a garden out front, right? Like little things like that. And, and all of a sudden they started feeling, they looked a little better, right? They, they had a little skip in their step, and they probably started taking a little more, and, these are the benefits of doing this work, is that, Native First Nations families are just like, well, I've lived in this house my whole life. I've never seen it look so nice. All of a sudden start treating people a little better. Like, and their addictions will sort of go down a little bit, right? They started, taking more pride in their houses, right? And they busy themselves with a garden instead of going to, say, the liquor store or whatever, right? Like, they find little things to, like, now they're focused on upkeeping this thing that they actually appreciate. Right. And then so there's little side benefits of doing this work, right? And you get to see in little rewards. And I always say that to the guys too, is like, especially my stint in politics too, is like, I told the portfolios and stuff like that when I was in meetings. I was like, these are kind of very kind of risky ideas, but I'll take the hit, right? You know what I mean? If I'm kind of talking to the directors, like, yeah, it's a good decision, go with it. And if they don't like it, I'll take the hit, right? I'll take the hit from the community, whatever. But I think it's a good risk, right? And that's what you're doing when you're making decisions. So
why did you leave?
I
think it's inspiring.
Yeah. So I mean, that was not to criticize politics, but it was consuming a lot of my time. And it didn't seem like it was moving fast enough for me because, my philosophy in it. Okay. So you have, say, 8 people at a table, right? And they all have different ideas. And that's the difference between First Nations and, say, Western culture, is that, you have parties, right? Liberal, and I'm not an expert on political science or anything, but, you have basically people that are elected in, and they all have the same rough ideas, right? Conservative, liberal, like they're all kind of the same. But you have a table of First Nations, and guess what? You have liberals, conservatives. They all have different ideas, and they sit at the same table. So guess what? Coming to a decision is really tough. Yeah. You know what I mean? So typically, when like several people disagree, nothing gets done. You know what I mean? So you don't really come to an accurate conclusion, I think. Which is nice. Like I said, that dialogue creates a lot of opportunities, but also too is like, I felt like the amount of time I was spending in meetings and talking and doing this other stuff, and the impractical hands-on work that I was doing wasn't there. So I'm like, you know what? And I wanted to there was about 20 houses that were vacant in Seabird. So I was like, I want to be the one that kind of takes hold of that. I want to see what these issues are. I don't want this to happen again. Right. So, and then I was like, well, it was kind of a either or. I felt my work with my company was being more impactful than, say my work at a table of like 8. Right. So, and it was like, I had to make a decision. I'm like, okay, I think if I stay in politics, my company will fail. And, and then I'll be resentful this way. And so I had to and also too, it was like, you can't be in politics and serve your community, as a contractor either. So there's very many reasons, I guess, in terms, is because I think I learned what I learned there, and I realized how long it was going to take to make change. I just understood the process. I was like, okay, this is actually really a lengthy process to make anything happen, because now you have this title and you can't be an individual. You are now a political figure, and now you can't actually just do things on your own. You actually have to have people agree with it before you move. And so I was very restricted, political restriction. And also there's a lot of, political gridlock in certain areas. But I had an idea. And I was like, okay, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a company. I'm going to hire my own guys. I'm going to create my own revenue, and I'm going to just do projects myself. And, here we go, problem solved. Now I don't have to wait a month for other people to agree with me or not. You know what I mean? I was like, I create my own revenue. I could start projects. I can build a playground if I want. I could just do all these things if I have my own revenue. And I was like, okay, great. And so, because making money has never been, is this a challenge of almost anything? And again, when we're talking about money, it takes a lot of agreements, right? Like if we're talking about government funded budgets and stuff like that, it's like, everybody has to be on board, and people get really they whip out the magnifying glass every time things got to be right and checked before they sign any checks, right? And so I'm like, if I can create a company that's actually beneficial to the community and can create revenue, I could reinvest that revenue into the community, and it turns itself and it keeps propelling, right? And I don't have to ask 8 or 9 people if they agree with me or not.
Can you describe that more in detail? That reinvestment. Again, it seems like a lot of money leaves Indigenous communities when we talk about housing specifically. Hiring some third-party organization from another area to come in, build our houses, they take the money, and then hypothetically they spend that in their community, whether it's like a promontory or a Yarrow or some other community other than ours.
Yeah.
Keeping it within the community seems like an ethic of yours, and I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, and I think it kind of actually goes even more involved. Even hiring in the communities is a big one too, because at least within our people, and I'm not going to say that I hire all First Nations. I have a couple of non-First Nations, right, and that they're friends of friends. And I'm like, okay, I'll give them an opportunity, right, because I obviously need workers like anybody else, and so you have to find a balance. So my idea was, and again, one of my friends said, you like to support locally. I was like, no, I like to invest within my community as much as I possibly can. And so, but it's really hard to do work in your own circle. So found that out the hard way. But to get there, I have to build strengths in different ways, and ties and belief and trust, because working for your own community is really hard, especially because you live there and everybody watches you, and these are your family, these are your friends, right? And the word gets back to you constantly, right? I can imagine that the things, the concerns that happen in other communities that I do work in, I just don't hear it, right? Because they're all over there, right? And I'm in Seabird, and right, and so they probably Creek Cedar's coming and they took a little bit longer on this one, or or what's this, and I just don't hear the grievances. So then I'm going off my way and work, because that's just part of the job, right? We have to deal with people and their perspectives, right? So but I mean, again, I always say, I want, I guess when I seen all the numbers come in and how much that we needed the cost to fix these houses, and what would be really beneficial if that money stayed here. So I was like, if I start my company, hire, and this was a story of mine with one of the guys that I originally hired. He hadn't had to work in several months and everything, and he'd applied for our community work, but it was never an opportunity for him. I hired him. Boom, he was killing it. And then I started paying him more, and then, and then he was actually in the arrears with housing, stuff like that too. So the projects that I was getting funding from the band, I was paying my workers, and then they're paying the housing, right? They're paying their debts off to the band. So it's almost like, boom, here, take this money, give it to him. He's going and giving it back to housing. So it's just like this, but again, all this work got done in the meantime. So again, that's investing internally. And that's what I kind of thought too. And it's like, I had an issue with that. Like, okay, say the government gives us $1 million to fix all these houses. Right. And then it's like, okay, and then we sit on it, have meetings about it, go and hire this, we get 3 people to quote on it. And then we hire the cheapest one, I guess, right? That's typically how things would work. And then all of a sudden he takes that, does the work, whatever the quality is, we have no way of tracking it really, other than having an inspector in. He takes that, $500,000, goes, and then we don't ever see it again, right? So I kind of had an issue with that. Not an issue, but I mean, it was just like, it seems like, hey, how about you, direct it towards, we keep it here. I pay my guys. I keep the revenue. I reinvest it in the community. I do kind of like projects, right? And then guess what? We use that money 3 times. You know what I mean? It's like it stays here, and then all of a sudden it circulates back to the band somehow, the people, right? And then and that's how you create a strong economy within your community. Is you take all this government funding and it stays here. You know what I mean? And it circulates, and people start up their own businesses, and we start buying from them, and it's just like this big ongoing, like this money just kind of keeps bouncing around, and then government gives another grant to fix more houses, and the same thing, and then you have this big mountain of this big economy on Seabird or what community you're on, right? or even if it's, First Nations and other communities, I don't mind, right? Like, but I think we've always been stuck in the cycle where all these government, funding comes in and just leaves, and it's like just constantly pumping money into this community, and it just leaves, right? And then we hire, all that other stuff. So
I don't understand. You have this mindset that seems logical, reasonable. It all makes sense. I definitely agree with you, and yet I never hear it. I completely agree with you. I just never hear this mindset of trying to grow Indigenous economies in this way. Like, just the simple things you've just said, I just don't hear it very often. And it seems so reasonable and logical. And I'm grateful that people like you are doing this work.
Yeah, I think because, I kind of fit into a fairly unique category because not a whole lot of contractors, I guess, would say would see the numbers and, and are in the contractor field and all this other stuff, right? And again, I've always had this sort of strong intuition of finances and sense of, I've always been curious about it, right? Like, where does money come from? How is it spent? Where does it go? So even in my time on council and stuff like that, I was very interested in, hey, what's our audit look like? What are the details? Can I talk with finance? I wasn't on the portfolio. I kind of wish I was, because I had a lot of questions, like, where's our money moving? Because I constantly, that's a big part of being, a business owner. You have to be tracking everything. And that's a big statement to say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? So measuring all these things is quite important, right? So you, and again, it's like, what are we spending money on, right? Like, where can we save this and that, and where could we reinvest? And people are confused about assets and liabilities constantly, right? So, they say, oh, these houses are our biggest asset. They're not. They're our biggest liability, because guess what? We keep fixing them, move people in, they keep depreciating, we keep fixing. They're the biggest liabilities we have, 200 houses, and we keep repairing them, keep spending more and more money on it, money that we could be focused on developing more mental strategies to kind of increase the quality of their lives. And so, and again, and these things have been talked about. It's just no one was able to implement. Like, there has been construction crews, and I think this idea has been practiced a little bit. But again, that was years ago. And, people don't have the information we have now. Like, our generation, we're super fortunate because we have basically everything at our fingertips, right? We, in our pocket, we can Google anything. We can YouTube anything pretty much. And, and that's the fortunate thing. And people like yourself, they just take advantage of it. Like, yeah, boom. Why would I not start a podcast? Like, I could learn how to do it online or whatever. I could actually just email somebody and they'll tell me how, or, all these things, right? Like, it's just, we're so fortunate with information these days, right? And I mean, and that's my thing is that, I don't have a too strong of an educational background. I didn't finish my science degree, but I was in it, and I was like, well, I think I'm more of a practical learner anyway, like, and I've taken a lot of risk, and that costs money, but I think it's just like, I more or less, I still have that sort of like that research mentality. I still think, let's see if this works, right? And then I get a thrill out of it, and it gives, like, it's kind of fun. Like, I have an idea, let's see if it works, right? And then let's learn along the way. I learn a lot, just kind of trial and error, right? And then so, if this is something that, most people will buy into, and I think they do. I've had several communities that really like the idea, and I have to explain to them, and, I have conversations like this, a little bit short and sweet, 10-minuters or whatever, what I'm trying to do and my ideas that I want to keep, but it takes tolerance too. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, again, what I'm trying to invent per se is going to be it's going to take a lot of patience and empathy from other communities too, because, well, I'm investing in a market that, in a group of fellas that really are still trying to find themselves too. Right. I mean, if I wanted it to be easy, I would put an ad out on Craigslist, Facebook, whatever, qualified, framers, technicians, or whatever, plumbers. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the First Nations developing their skills, right? So there's going to be a lot of like kind of ups and downs along the way, right? So my idea, so I'm getting there. So I knew the first thing I had to do was build capacity with my guys, right? Get systems in place, get their confidence up, get vehicles on the road, get tools all together, right? And then all of a sudden, after say the first year, which we are now in, I have a crew of guys that can do the work effectively, right? And so now I could actually, but it wasn't without taking risk, right? It wasn't without people investing in my vision and being kind of patient with me, because I was still learning these things, how to be a manager, how to be, a positive influence on these guys. and how to develop their skills too. And like, and again, it was leaning on each other. It wasn't like I knew everything. I was just hiring people that knew the skills that I needed, right? And because I think I had that philosophy. You know, my best friends growing up, he was a maintenance guy in Seabird, and a couple of other guys I played soccer with forever. They were expert framers, and I got other new guys that were just like amazing at what they did. And I just took that and utilized it, right? And I was like, hey, I got a job for you. Do you want to do this, right? Get them to buy into the idea. And like, yeah, okay, great. And then they just continue to kind of thrive in it. And so, but I'm like, hey, I'm going to give you these other guys who actually don't know what they're doing. Can you help them? Yeah, okay, right. So it's like there's a lot of things to figure out along the way.
Can you describe the journey that somebody may come on? You did a great job of this when we were just one-on-one, of like how someone develops, of like hiring them, laying that out, and then supporting them when they're working to get their license back, or when they're trying to pay off certain debts, or when they're trying to get their feet under them, because the job is usually for people step one, and then the other supports aren't always there. So I'm just curious as to what the development of a person is like within your company. What are you striving towards?
Yeah, and that's another thing too. I think because everybody's at different areas of life, like you mentioned, like they're kind of at their different spots in their development of, you know, some of them have houses, some of them have children, some of them don't. And then, you know, I've had guys when I took them on, they hadn't had their license in years, right? And so that was my main goal. I was like, okay, boom, bare minimum. What do you need in life? You need financial security, you need your license, you need a place to live, and I want you to get out of debt, like those types of things, right? I want you to start taking your finances seriously. So again, yeah, for a lot of them was like, oh, I didn't get my license because I owe a lot of money on insurance. Like, okay, well, how much can I could afford? And it's like, all right, well, how about I pay for that? And obviously I'm in control of there, so we'll pay part of that off each check, right? And then it's sort of a contractual thing. And honestly, there's people that have left and they still owe me money, but it was just like, okay, they still have their license, and whatever will happen, right? Universe balances itself out. But yeah, I've had, you know, those opportunities where, again, it's like, oh, I don't have insurance in my car, I owe like $1,800. I'm like, okay, well, let's do that. Let's lend you the money, and then we'll just kind of, you'll slowly pay me off over the years, but focus on the work, because you can't do a good job if you're stressed out about your finances or whatever, right? You can't focus on the work, right? So creating that atmosphere of security, right? Like, the only thing I got to worry about today is punching in and punching out, in a sense. Like, that should be sort of your mindset when you're going to work. You should be like, you know, my wife's texting me, you know, like the phones are getting cut off, or this and that, or rent's due, you know, those things. Like, those aren't the productive things to really keep your, you know, mind wrapped around. So when somebody does come in, I guess the first thing is handshake, boom. It's like, okay, what's your story? What's your skill level? I'm like, okay, well, where do you want to go, right? Like, and that's where I have to sit people down and say, like, well, what do you see for yourself? And a lot of them have never been asked that question, right? A lot of guys don't, like, well, I don't know, like, you know, making money, you know, and that's it. Like, that's a survival tactic, like a daily thing. Just like, well, I just know I need money. And I'm like, for what though, right? It's like, so set a target. It's like, okay, well, let's get, and a lot of them will see, you know, it costs about, you know, I guess all inclusively like $1,500-$1,800 to get your license back if you have to do the driver improver program, stuff like that. Because I've done it, honestly. Like I said, I have a history with drinking, driving, alcoholism, those things, right? And so in those moments, like I had people actually reach out and try to help me, but I was just like, yeah, you know, I don't know, right? So in this moment, I'll have to ask the guy, I was like, okay, well, put the bigger picture in his head, right? Like, okay, how would I pay for this? And then like, okay, and then we'll take it off each check, and then they have to do the course, and then they get their license back like within 6 or 7 months or whatever it is. And they're almost like, kind of don't believe it, right? And they're like, okay, this is great. And again, you know, as much as it could be a success story, it's not always, but like, okay, great. So now you're on the road. Now I can pay you more, right? Now you're more valuable, right? And so this is my investment is starting to pay off. Now I can put you in a van, go to work, and then I don't know how to like really find rides for you anymore, right? Now you're a self-sufficient man. Now you can drive your kids' practice. Now, you know, those types of things, right? And then now you're kind of getting more confidence, right? So people, and that's sketchy because there's a timeline to it, and it's not always easy to read. You start giving opportunities for certain people, they will like just start feeling it. All of a sudden it's too much for them, right? The road is a little bit rocky. All of a sudden they got all these responsibilities, got all this freedom. Easy to abuse that if you haven't quite worked for it, in a sense, right? Like, you're getting all these like kind of new things. And so I'm realizing that. So there's a balance, like anything. Whereas a lot of guys will be really grateful. I'm like, wow, this is great, you know, and never want to like sacrifice it ever again. And, you know, I've had ups and downs with it. But, you know, creating that opportunity for guys to just take their lives seriously, take themselves seriously, right? And that there's like, And then in terms, like, that's just mutually beneficial for everybody. Now I got a person who's responsible, can drive, has a vehicle, actually has pride in his work, is well fed at home. Like, all these things is just good business, right? In a sense, like I said, it just kind of, it's reciprocated. If the guys feel good and they're proud of themselves, they just do good work, right? And they're more attentive and can communicate more. And, and again, like, appreciative in some senses, right? But the goal to that is actually really hard. Like, I've tried to, and it's hard to sit there and say, like, oh, I'm just inspiring a whole generation of men to do good work. And it's like, it's not always perfect. I've definitely coddled particular ones and, paid the prices for it. And, so it's like some of them need more of a push than others, but some of them need more research too. Like, well, actually, what is the underlying issues going on here? Like, you seem to do really good and then you fall off. You do really good and then you fall off, right? Like, so people are going through these influxes and you'll never know, right? Because they'll never share with you what's going on in their personal life, right? So, but again, it's the statistics for helping people is really low. Like, if you say, you have somebody who's like changed their life for the great, like for the good, the success rate is very low for anybody. So I'm going to say it's about like 25% of the people that I try to kind of, employ and help and do these things, well, is a good story. I'm going to say roughly. And then eventually, once I get better at it, I'm sure the statistics will increase. Like, say by next year, I'm like, oh, I could read the situation better. I can understand the character a little better. I was like, hey, he's actually going to take this seriously. I think I have a good feeling about him, right? Yeah. So, and it's like with any program, with, like the AA program, anything, then the First Nation, the Red Road stuff, like a lot of those stats are very low for anybody that fully recovers from addiction. So, and this is just one avenue, right? Using work as a motivator to actually empower people to make positive change in their lives, right? So, and again, it's basically really hard to first identify what their barriers are, right? And then some of them will be really honest about it, and some people will, if their egos are kind of up, they won't say, no, I'm fine. But I'm like, with the bare necessities is something that I like to focus on. Like, okay, and I say it like, so first thing first, yeah, license. Second thing, like, well, okay, great. Let's, how's your home life? Do you got any debts? Like, let's get you sort of organized. So when I started the company, I didn't have any sort of admin system enroll. I didn't have payroll, right? Like, I didn't do any of that stuff at first. Everything was kind of e-transfer-ish. And then eventually I had an idea. I was like, I want these guys to start, having a track record of, the financial record, right? So then I started using, getting the systems in order. Now they got pay stubs, stuff like that, right? And they're going to have T4s and all that. And now they're financing vehicles, right? And it's like, before they had like no idea. Now, they understand the importance of having documentation for things. I'm like, well, now you've established credit, right? Now you could actually finance these things. Some have bought cars, trucks, right? And these things for their families, and they're fishing in it and all these other things, right? So, there's really good stories here because now they're starting to understand finances, right? A little bit, and what these places are looking for, right? And so educating themselves a little bit more when they're looking at their pay stubs, like, what is that? What is that? What is that? Right? Yeah. These fundamental things of, well, this is taxes and it's, EI. And so, like, little benefits of just being more involved, having these conversations with the guys. Like, okay, you feel like this is annoying that I have to do time cards and stuff, but I need to input this stuff so that you have this so you can get this, right? And so you always have to explain things thoroughly, because everybody just wants to think like, I worked, give me money, right? And there's more to it than that, right? Like,
absolutely. And valuing the work that you do and understanding that effort, energy, passion, they have a value. And often we struggle with understanding that value because it is, I worked 2 weeks at McDonald's and then I get a paycheck. We don't realize that people like Elon Musk, people like Jeff Bezos, whether you think they're great or evil people, they did a lot of investing in the early years that nobody ever saw, that nobody cared about. Like, there's stories of Elon Musk sleeping in his factories, and surviving in there. And then now he's worth so much money and we're like, oh my gosh, why is he worth that? So that's so unreasonable. And it's like, he spent years on the brink of bankruptcy before he made it to where he was. There was huge investments. Jeff Bezos, famous, and then Jim Pattison as well. Fascinating people, because what they did is Jeff Bezos was like, Amazon is going to be the prime delivery system for everything. And so every time he embraced a problem, he was like, how do I build something that will fix that problem, that will make me money as well, that will go back into the company. And so he bought, I don't know if you know Ring, but Ring is a company that you put up at your door, and then you click it, and it's like a doorbell, but then it has a camera in it. So it sees you on the other side, and I can see from my phone that you're at my door, and I can like allow you to leave the package, accept the package, whatever it is, from my phone, from anywhere on planet Earth. So you don't have to be in the home in order to respond to that. And he bought that company for like $1 billion, because doesn't that tie in perfectly with Amazon? It's the same with Jim Pattison, who owns Save on Foods, PriceSmart. He also owns all the signage from Chilliwack to Abbotsford. So all those signs, what do they advertise? They advertise a lot of Save on Foods. They advertise a lot of the radio stations. And what does he own? He owns the radio stations. So he has a system in place that complements each other, so that he can let people know about his radio station through his signs, and he can let people know about Save on Foods from both of those businesses. And then he has car dealerships, and what are advertised along the road? Car dealerships. And so people don't realize the brilliance behind a business. Oftentimes we go, why is Jim Pattison a billionaire and one of the only billionaires in Canada that's made it that way? Well, it's because every time they saw a problem, they looked for cool solutions that could also be their own businesses that would thrive independently. And you very much have this mindset of investing in people, but also looking for problems to solve within your business that will allow your business to thrive. And I think that that's really fascinating. And when I did law school, I was studying Indigenous entrepreneurship, because there is this culture right now, when I was even studying entrepreneurship, of people being like, well, Indigenous people weren't entrepreneurs. They weren't business people. And that could not be less true. When you're trading a canoe for 100 salmon, when you're trading like whale blubber for this, like there is prices. And we don't often understand that money existed prior to colonization as well, through dentilium shells and through just understanding the value of the work you do. And we're in a time where so many people don't know how to value their time. And through this podcast, I might not be making any money from it right now, but I think that the time I invest in this is of value. I'm just not receiving that today. So that doesn't mean I won't ever receive money for this. And when somebody comes along and they want to invest, I'm going to price high, because I've invested a lot for it to be here today. And so as much as it isn't worth anything to anybody else, the brand, the effort, the energy, it's all accumulated. So one day somebody's going to be like, oh, what if I sponsored your podcast? How much? I'm going to say, it's going to be this number. And that sucks for you if you wanted it to be something cheap, because I invested in this. And if I'm going to bring on people, they have to appreciate the years of work that went in before they were sponsors, before they were supporters. And that's a challenge for so many people when we talk about money in Indigenous communities, from my perspective, is because we're not good at explaining that money is the value you create for other people, for other businesses, for your community. That is a signal. It isn't the end all and be all, but it's a signal of the value you've created. And I think we need to do a better job of communicating that to people, because so often it's like, I have $600, now I'm going to spend $600, but it's like, that's how much somebody valued you for the work that you did. And I love construction, landscaping, craftsmanship type work, because there's two levels of value. There's the value you create, which shows up on your paycheck, but there's also looking at how you garden something. Like, you see good landscaping. You can see it when you see all of the lines perfectly drawn in. Within like religious ideas, there's the idea of the walled garden, Adam and Eve, and the idea that everything is exactly the way it should be. And as much as nature is abundant, it is controlled. It is beautiful because the waterway just flows just a certain way. The trees just are carved a certain way. It all looks beautiful and put together. It's the same with a house. And your belief in the value of the home really stands out to me, because it's something I feel like is a common trope around Indigenous people, that we don't value our homes. That when people talk in everyday society about Indigenous houses, it's always with how many cars are broken down outside of it. Is it well maintained? Is it properly painted? And there is a sense of shame that I've seen my clients have around the quality of life they live in their house. And so changing that, giving something for someone to be proud of, and having that craftsmanship of somebody being able to be, I built that house. That means more to people than I wrote that report. Like it will always mean more because you can see it, you can feel it when you're standing in it. It feels like a home. That is something different than I filled out this document and it was a good document. Like that doesn't carry the same level of weight as looking at, wow, like this is really secure house and like the structure. You notice that like old windows, the one with the one window level, they just feel less secure than the double paned windows. Like there's a sense of security with that. There's small things that people don't always notice on the surface level, but around the house that can make it like a home. And I think that is likely a great tool for people to be able to be a part of that kind of process.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is actually like the value that I was trying to instill in myself is like, I don't know what my value is yet, right? So my first year again was like, okay, well, I just need to get my foot in the door, right? I need to create something that people value. Like they want to see, and I mentioned on my website, I want people to see a Creek Cedar truck and be like, oh, cool, and have a good feeling. Not see like, typical whatever and be like, oh god, that's going to be expensive. Because when you think about it, when you have somebody come into your front door, fridge repairman, whatever, you're like thinking, how much money is this going to be, right? You want to have a good feeling when you see that logo come up, like, oh, they're going to do good work and I'm going to get a good deal and I'm going to feel great after, right? And those are the three combinations of like things that, if anything, right? And so And that's kind of what we're in the business of, like in that trading of feeling, right? Like sense of accomplishments versus monetary value. Because I mean, I don't really have much use for a bunch of money, like in a sense of, I'm not. And you mentioned Elon Musk and Chris. What was the name? Bezos. What was his
Jeff
name?
Bezos.
Jeff Bezos. Yes. And I think they're different philosophies, but also it's funny because the two people ahead of those industries typically always are, right? Because you have one, and one's always slightly ahead of the other, because it's like, I feel Elon is, and I'm interested because, I drive an electric car. And I've always really gravitated towards him because, well, that he's not a flashy guy. He's like, he looks at money. He's like, wonder what I could invest in. Right. And he's always in this like, his main goal is like, say one of them is get to Mars. I want to change the automobile industry. I want to do these things. These are just like projects for him. You know what I mean? Like he does care about people, but he's not like a people person per se, like in my mind. Cause, I don't much care to want to have to be, acknowledged or praised for the good things that I do. I just want them to happen. You know what I mean? Like, and those things. And I think that's what, I think again, like Elon, he's like, I don't like having to be lifted up for these things. I just think they're cool. Right. And that's what a lot of engineers' mindsets are. They just like, they don't like people, they like things. And you know what I mean? And I think with the history and what motivates you, is again, just to see something get completed. Right. And then and again, it's just not turning back, and I get a little bit worried sometimes when something's not going right. Like, but you're very determined. No, it's gonna get done. So again, like you said, you have that mindset. Oh, okay, truck broke down. What do I do? How do I? Oh, okay, I should have got BCA. Like those things, right? Like, and I was like, okay, so you strategize. Where do I reinvest? Okay, and this is the tolerance, and maybe I guess the control that business owners have to have too is like, if you're a flashy guy, chances are you're not going to actually succeed very much in business because you're going to do it for the money, right? And that's sort of the thing. And people think that money and ego is where they're motivated. And I'm not saying you're not going to succeed. And maybe Jeff Bezos isn't like that per se, but you can definitely tell he likes stuff. And for Elon, he's like, he just likes things. Like he just thinks things, it's like, I can't wait till I get 22 more billion so I can feel like what else I can build, right? He just likes creating things. And similarly so, I think if you're a good business owner, you don't get distracted by the money, right? And you're just thinking all the time, like, wow, did we profit anything there? Great. What should I buy now? Like, how could I reinvest into this company event? So it's always just adding and adding. And, there's times where you're more or less just taking hits. You're like, oh my God, can I take this anymore? Something else that breaks down is going to sink me. And maybe not, right? But then it's like, it just teaches you to strategize, right? Hey, if I need more money, then I have to go and maybe borrow some. I really have to stay committed to this idea, because a lot of business owners, when they start things, they start depending on people. They take, say $10,000 hit on something. They'll be like, oh, that was too much. I'm going to just start, firing people and then just stick to myself. Stay in a controlled environment. Or you take the other mindset and say, what what can I learn from this? That was a $10,000 like learning lesson. And then re-strategize. Okay, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. Or, hey, I'm going to hire this person for something else, right? Like I'm going to maybe subcontract that work out, so we're not specializing in that anymore. Like, you take just little lessons, and maybe if I hire a subcontractor, I could still benefit, take 10% off the revenue, and like at least that's just a contractual thing. And then I can reinvest that into the big, huge deficit I just took, right? You know what I mean? Like, so you find strategies to pay things off. You just can't get intimidated to loss, right? And again, that's kind of it, right? So a lot of these companies that succeed just constantly want to learn. They constantly want to problem solve. Like any business, like the greatest and the top are always looking to improve. And I think it's a really healthy mindset to be in. Say, for example, like I think you'd have the same way if your podcast was like, say, competing with Joe Rogan or whoever, right? You'd be like, that wouldn't be something you wouldn't just sit. You'd be like, I'm still looking for the next interview. I'm still looking to, strive and strive and strive. And, and that's the feeling that I want to give to people is like, and it's not so much saying that you're not good enough. It's just like, it's saying that you could always be better, right? Like, think about it in positively. Like, I'm doing. So if I like sat here after a year and say, hey, I did it. And, I got this company and I got all these things and built all these things. And like, and I've just like sat on that. Like, that's not really, there's no end goal to this, right? And for most of the things that we do, like, and people probably ask me like, well, what's your end goal? Like, don't really have one. Like, this company could always provide more services, could always be more useful. I could always hire more guys. I could always take people out of poverty. I could always, create more revenue to start more projects, right? I could always be talking to more people, individuals. I could always develop more, services, right? It's endless, right? I can, I eventually could start creating a clothing line if I want, and you know what I mean, and use the revenue to pay for whatever, right? Like these different things, like it's an ongoing cycle, and I like it because there's always something to do, right? And there's always people to talk to, right? I've come into contractors. I could feel right out of the gate we're just really into the quick paycheck, and they don't last long, right? Because they get that a few $1,000s revenue, and they're just like, sweet, that was easy, and they try it again. They're hungry, and they start buying brand new shiny things, and I'm like, yeah, they might succeed because they have a really good work ethic and they're really good at what they do. But again, it's like, well, you're not going to get any bigger if you got really high spending habits. And all of a sudden, you start buying all these things that you're liable for, right? And so I try to stay within my means. And anybody that knows me, I'm kind of like somewhat of a frivolous, frugal guy is the other word. Whatever. They don't like calling me cheap. But it's like, I just like to live within my means and like to strategize, right? Like, building things costs a lot of money, right? And it's like, but for me, it's like money well spent, I think. And I mentioned my dad a little while. He's passed now, but actually, he told me this a while, like when I was a kid, and it stuck with me. He's like, oh, and I really hated this red car that we had. It was like this beat up, ugly car, and it was embarrassing. And then finally we, he took it. He drove us drove me to school and stuff. And obviously, he's like. We drove it for like a year, and I was like, can we get rid of this car? Whatever, right? And he's like, you know what? He's like, I bought that car for $500, and I sold it for $500. And, we drove it for a year. It's like, that car made us money in a lot of ways, right? And it was like super easy on gas and this and that, right? And, and like those things. And then he talked about his truck. He's like, see, that truck paid for itself, right? Because he had a truck and he roofed. So he did like 3 or 4 roofs with it. And he's like, that truck paid itself off in a month. I'm like, oh. So I started thinking about those things, right? Like people that actually, purchase things. And it's silly. Well, it's not silly, but it's like we come to this, culture where people that make the least amount of money buy the most expensive shit. For real. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then you will see business owners that do quite successful don't actually go to the high end stores. They're like, why would I spend $500 on a pair of shoes? Like, I'm fine with these things. Like, they're very wealthy, but they just find more necessary ways to spend it. Yeah. Right?
They're called old money. I don't know if you've heard that saying, but so. There's new money and then there's old money. So rappers are a good example of new money because they show it as much as they can. Old money, there's a guy in downtown Chilliwack. He owns, I don't know if he still does, but the Royal Hotel. He owns that whole block, and he dresses like a tradesperson. He wears ratty pants, ratty jacket, like nothing fancy about him. And he has to be worth millions of dollars and have an incredible bank account for everything that he owns. Doesn't care. That's not what he was in it for. And he's always working on stuff. He's always fixing problems. And he looks less fancy than I do. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he's doing very well for himself. And so that's like old money. And people up in like Ryder Lake, people in the communities we might think of as upper echelon or higher quality, or the more wealthy people in our community often have that farmer kind of mindset of like, I'm not chauvinistic, nobody needs to know, it doesn't matter, because it's just a representation of their success, and it's just a number in a bank account. And many people hit those points of like, they'll never need all of that money. It will just be passed on to their children, grandchildren, and so on. And it's something that really has always fascinated me, which is like, what does that look like? What does financial success look like over 7 generations, not over 2 weeks, a year? Because like you see people who gamble a lot. It was just funny. I was waiting for gas, and this lady was like, "Oh, I want this lottery ticket." And then the person was like, "Okay," went to grab it, and she was like, "No, not that one, another one, like of the exact same version." And then he was like, "Actually, that's the only one we have left." And she was like, "Oh, then it must be lucky." And it was like, no, you just said you didn't want it, and now since it's the only one, you're going to take it. And like the whole mindset around gambling is like arbitrary. And then if they get $10,000, $20,000, they're going to misspend it, buy more lottery tickets. Like they're not going to have a long-term vision because that's not in their nature. Like that's not what they're used to. So many people like, oh, what I'd do if I won the lottery. And it's like, you wouldn't do any of the things you think you do because you wouldn't know what to do with that money if you had it to begin with, because they don't have. Now I give you $20,000. You're thinking of what projects can I do? How can I do more? How can I grow this business, which is going to be fruitful because it's investment. But most people have no idea how to invest their money in a fruitful way that's going to last long term. Because one area you talked to me about was investing in communities, parks, playgrounds, sports. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's just like, because I know that with capital projects, stuff like that, public works mostly, it was very something I was interested in while I was doing some work in Seabird. Because I honestly, the money spent in parks, recreation, all this stuff is huge mental benefits for the next generation, right? So, I mean, even if I had just a basketball court for the little neighborhood that I live in, would just be huge for the kids. They'd be out, so they're not on the road, this and that, right? I think I see that as just like a huge benefit. And not only that, you call it Creek Cedar Park and people will just like love you, right? And so, I mean, it's got a lot of, return policies too, like, but in the sense of it all, like, it's just good investment. It's just good. It's just what we stand for, right? And it's like, I want to create positive change for the future. And I think if you stay motivated like that, and if you stay focused, like, I can't wait until I can create, a couple $100,000 of revenue, so then we can actually start investing in things like that, right? And, like, oh, it's a tax write-off. It's like, it's kind of a myth, but, and it's like, well, no, because that's sort of the goal here. It's like, hey, we're tradespersons. We want to create, opportunities for our kids, right? Like, so, I mean, if my son wants to be a home builder, it's like awesome, right? And, well, guess what? We have to nurture his development until he gets there. And then same with a couple of the guys that I work with, they all got kids. If they're going to work for Creek Cedar in the future, it's hopefully that they have a good development, good childhood, right? It's just it's a good feeling to say that you were part of something, right? And that's what this podcast is called, Bigger Than Me, that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And, and again, I think the entrepreneurial side of things is that you don't get, that your time is your biggest asset in a lot of ways. And then you stop really focusing on the returns of it. You're kind of thinking like the return of it is that I'm actually learning and investing in myself. Right. And this whole year and everybody, I tell the guys, when you guys make more money than I do, it costs a lot of money to keep this thing going because we're in the development stage, right? Everything's in the development stage for the first, I'm going to say 5 years in some ways, but of course I wanted things to happen fast. And so I took a lot of risk. It cost a lot of money. And you know what I mean? And it's fine. It's those hits are my responsibility, right? And say we go and we build a park and we go build, say I've done projects for different communities where like, I don't make any money off them because it's like just good. It's good relationship building, right? And, build stairs for elders. And I've done these things like I've paid the guys to deliver like firewood to the elders as well. Like these are community projects that I want to make sure that I keep it keeps me accountable, right? He's like, hey, what have I done for the community lately? I don't know. I can't remember the last thing. So, hey, let's go. Let's make sure we're keeping this flowing because it's kind of what you have to keep that vision in mind, right? Like you said, your why. And it's like, so, because I want the guys to also feel like they're providing a service too, right? And then so a lot of the projects that I take on, and this is a very fine line because what I'm trying to do is offer service like way cheaper than the competition, all the other contractors out there. I'm trying to fit within First Nations budgets, which aren't like huge, right? So I've taken hits on a couple projects just to keep things going, right? Like, taken money out of my own pocket a bunch of times just to kind of like keep operations going, which is, it is what it is. My money is the company's money, basically, in a lot of ways. Like, it just goes back and forth. Like, things happen, right? So it's just, I think it's worth knowing that, like, okay, what do I want to do? It's not so much my ego. Like, you buy every truck you buy, every piece of equipment buy. It's like, some people at first, they get add to your ego and it gets carried away with you. But I mean, if you, with the real work, I guess the mark of success, I think, is if you've actually created something worth remembering, right? And it's like, so some people say, like, oh man, that guy made $1 million. Like, nobody cares, really. Like, it's not something that, like, stands the test of time. You know what I mean? Like, you got this reputation. But if you say, hey, Matt built that park down the road, that's still standing. I'm like, that's something. Well, I mean, not Matt, Creek Cedar, right? The company's its own person. That's why I really wanted to incorporate. Is like, I wanted to create this thing that Creek Cedar, and I don't really promote myself, like, visually, right? Like, I don't put myself on the webpage. I don't put myself on the Facebook page, right? Yeah, I'm the owner of it, but it's not about me, right? It's just about an idea and a philosophy, right? So if we're building parks, doing really good things, people are like, oh yeah, Creek Cedar built that, Creek Cedar did that. And people are like, who's this Creek Cedar guy anyway? It's like, it's not about the guy. It's about the company. It's about the philosophy. It's like, so.
Do you think that's dangerous at all? Because as much as Tesla is Tesla without Elon Musk, you almost need a voice. Like, I've commented, one of my favorite nutritional places is Beyond Nutrition. One of his challenges is he incorporated as Beyond Nutrition, but the guy behind it is Johnny. And people go there for him, and they have confidence in him, and they love his mindset and his approach. It's the same with Bill from The Town Butcher. Bill is the person who cared about quality meat before anybody was thinking about quality meat, who cared about farm fresh eggs before farm fresh eggs mattered to anyone. Like, he started in 2008, and I'd say a lot of that kind of movement happened in the 2013 areas. And so there's often big movers and shakers behind the business. And if we don't have an opportunity, like, people will not connect to the same extent with Tesla as they do with Elon Musk. Like, his name will be remembered, just like how Edison, light bulb. Like, we know Edison, we know light bulb. Like, it's almost like a process. So do you think that's a challenge at all?
Well, that's a good point, actually, because, if that's what I struggle with, because, again, I mentioned this about ego. And this is my, almost everybody's worst enemy, right? Ego, pride costs money, tons of it, right? Because if here you are trying to dress to impress people around you, and I want to make sure that I'm always keeping that at bay, because being like having addictions in the past, like, I know that that's the biggest center point of actually ever asking for help. So I have to regulate that constantly. Like, if I'm disappointed, frustrated, so I never wanted a whole lot of attention around the success of this company, because, well, I didn't want it to shift me. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I guess I always wanted to, like, okay, acknowledge that this separate being, in a sense, right? This Creek Cedar reputation is self-fulfilling, self-dependent kind of thing, right? So it's not, there's no face to it. But again, I understand, like, that could cause some complications. And I think you're right. Sometimes you do have to be that sort of that figurehead, right? Yeah. And I think that it'll get to that point. But right now, it's nice to know that it's sort of this fictitious being in itself. It's reliable on doing work. Because honestly, and this is from my experience in different areas, I don't want to be an easy target sometimes too. Do I have the time and energy and strength to resist a lot of criticism right now? Probably not, right? So I mean, and then again, those things take energy. That's why I really commend you, because you promote yourself a lot, which is great, and it takes a lot of courage to do that. Because again, in every population, there's people that are really, they do the chicken shit stuff, and they'll take people down easily enough, and it's easy to say something negative and feel empowered by it, right? And there's these sicknesses, and I feel that. And there's these standards of perfectionism that really are hurting a lot of people, right? Like I said, the left side of the brain, I think that side, shame, guilt, all those other things, that's not where people want to live. And they are good. They're very powerful manipulation tactics, right? Using shame to not inspire people, but control people, right? They are very useful. But not the way that we want to do things. I want to kind of empower people productively, right? And so I try to I don't want to do so well that it gets to my head. You know what I mean? And that's why I guess maybe why I want to create this is what we're doing over here, right? Here I am, yes, I am kind of pulling strings over here, but I don't want to stay in the line. I don't want to get acknowledged. I don't want to, all this other stuff. I want that to fall on the guys, right? The good stuff to fall on the guys. They're the ones doing all the, on-site work, stuff like that. Feel, getting the praise because it's useful to feel praise, right? And again, taking all the crap, taking all the shit from certain things that just don't go right? Because it's always in the life of a contractor, so you can't have control of everything. So, you weed out the discrepancies, right? And so I'm like, okay, if there's an unsatisfied customer because you can't please everybody, then I'll have that conversation. Don't talk to my guys on site. It might be easier to go and shit on the guy that just painted your room the wrong color, but talk to me about it, right? I want to be that filter. Like, come here, I'll take the hit, and then I'll explain to him, right, in a nice way, because a lot of our people are very sensitive, right? I mean, most people are, right? If I said, for example, I'm sitting here criticizing, hey, that's a horrible painting on the wall. Like, what were you thinking? Like, boom, that just sits on you because you like that painting, right? You do this. And like, that's something that you've invested time, thought, and energy into. And then I'm criticizing it. Like, that's hard to take sometimes, right? Especially if it's coming from somebody who's really just doesn't give a shit about your feelings. Or it really understands your perspectives either, right? Because everybody's got their own perspectives. They're allowed to. So, and again, it's being able to filter out that information, right? Because like some people are really careless with their words, right? A lot of the times. So, and I know that, but the words are important, right? Every information is good. Any data, negative, positive, is good data, right? If you have somebody who's just crying around all the time on social media, bitching, complaining about all the work that Creek Cedar did, it's still good information, right? Like, you still have to look at it and say, like, well, what was their issue and why are they like that? Because we're not only into the building field, we're also in the helping people field. So in the other sense of it, I could learn how to navigate those clients, right? Like, I have to understand, like, maybe I could help them out with something else. Maybe it wasn't so much the deck that was their problem. Maybe there was something else, right? Then I can get to understand them a little better. Like, maybe I can work with the community. Like, hey, this person was really struggling with something. And so I could share that information because, one of my portfolios was health, and I was super interested in mental health because I need to be in control of that myself. Like, different people have different mental illnesses, and, I struggle with different anxieties and stuff like that. And I have to really be careful, like, where, again, my ego goes, right? Because my ego will get in the way of connection and spirituality and all this stuff, right? It'll separate me into this whole realm of me trying to establish this big empire. And it's like, it's not about an empire. It's about an idea, right? So, yeah, I can't remember what the original question was, but it was, I think it's kind of developing itself into its own sort of animal for a bit. And again, you're right. I'll probably have to step in and say, like, okay, here it is. Here's the spokesperson, right? And, if at the time being, I'm more focused on the guys, which I realized I had to do, right? If I didn't have a foundation, if I didn't have strong workers, if I didn't have all this, then I have nothing to preach, right? So this is where I'm investing in. And it's going to be constantly, checking in with them and making life a little bit, good for them, making sure that things are on a good path. And again, life happens, people come to challenges, and I want to make sure that I have the revenue and the holdings to support them. Like, oh man, my car just broke down and I just don't have the money. It's like, okay, here we go, right here, let me help you with that, right? Go to work. I want you to be comfortable. So it's like a family dynamic. I don't want to ever be like, well, it's not in the policy for us to support that. Because that's when you really get kind of like, because policy keeps you from being a human. Each situation is different. Yeah. I noticed that in certain policies that I've worked with, is like, we're always trying we're always trying to keep from, 1 out of 6 people hurt in the system. It's like, oh no, we don't do that because some people will steal or take advantage of it. Like, so what? Universal balance itself out. Why punish the 5 other people who really need the service, right? You know what I mean? So, for example, like, you put a restriction on, like for a food bank, let's say, like, oh no, you can only pull from the food bank once a month or something. But what if this family has 5 kids, and this other, because one person kept coming every week and they only live by themselves. Like, yeah, that's one person, right? But we're keeping 5 other families starving because we're trying to keep from this one taking revenge. So I'm like, policies are just really not all inclusive. So it's a lot of case by case stuff. And again, people who enforce these policies don't have the control, like the power to change them. So, and that's why I'm really kind of like, a little bit shaky on the whole idea. Yeah. So what I want to do is make sure that I have availability and time in order to kind of just really read each scenario logically and with an empathy, right? So if a guy is like, oh, Matt will lend you the money if you need to fix your car, or Matt will, like, well, whose car is it, right? Oh, it's my grandma's, or whatever. It's like, well, okay, I can't start fixing all of you. So, and again, I want to have the ability to be able to, like, you just read each situation logically, right? It's like, well, okay, I don't have the money to do it now, but we'll work something out, right? How would I help you with this? But then you put a little extra hours to pay for it off, right? Like there's always solutions to problems, right? And I don't want to ever just like rely on like the rules because I'm too tired to really like kind of listen to the problem, right? Because I'm more of a problem solver than a law enforcer.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where it's a good place to be. You're curious. You want to understand the situation. You want to figure out how to fix it. And that's what guys that are in the building field. And I think most people want to love coming with solutions. I think we're built that way genetically. Yeah. We're like, we feel so good. Again, it's like, you had a financial situation, you solved it, or hey, you had a broken leg on your chair and you fixed it. And you're like, oh, it's fucking sweet. My chair works all of a sudden. I just saved myself $20 or whatever it is. Right?
Yeah, I think ego is like a huge challenge for some people, but like it's all about just putting things into context. Because like there's been tons of news articles written about me, but you can't eat that up. Like I didn't even read the one they wrote about me most recently. Like you can't kind of get lost in the idea that you're important because they're getting some skewed. They're asking specific questions about a specific topic. It's not you. It's not the flaws when you I trip up the stairs. Like people don't see that in the news article. They don't see me spill something on myself because I sneezed at the same time. Like you're still just a person. And like I think often people can kind of lose that when they start to get the positive news articles written about them. But I want to ask because it's coming up. National Truth and Reconciliation Day is coming up. Your focus has been housing. And housing's been a huge challenge for Indigenous communities. How do you see people being meaningfully involved in National Truth and Reconciliation Day? Do you have any thoughts on how people can be a part of the solution from your perspective as someone who builds homes for Indigenous people in Indigenous communities? How do we think about this from your perspective?
Well, I think it's very different. I mean, because people are still very resentful towards the whole dynamic of like, okay, why are we forgiving the Pope or whatever? Like, why are we doing this whole thing? And I was like, yeah, I'm resentment keeps you sick, 100%. I know that much for sure. And again, forgiving people, you're doing yourself a favor in a lot of ways. It's not about them. But again, I think because people don't want to forget because they consistently want to punish. Like, oh, well, nothing will ever make up for the grievances that happened in my family, and I continue to struggle with because they're still dealing with those things. And I constantly think that it's regardless of what happened to us in the past, it's our responsibility today to actually figure out how to get over that, right? I mean, it's like, okay, what are we just going to say? Boom, this happened to me, and all of a sudden I'm just going to pass it down to my kids? No, screw that. Like it's you have an opportunity here. The tools, the people, everything they're asking, they're trying to support you, right? They're trying to support you to get you through these things. And, and sometimes people will just kind of sidestep it. And they're like, no, well, I'd rather be mad. I would rather be resentful and all that stuff. But I think it's more or less an opportunity to just kind of like speak what information we have, right? And again, I don't know what the platform is going to be. If there's going to be opportunities to share what I've seen, being in housing development and all that other stuff. And again, I think for me, it's the education part is that people don't really have the knowledge yet to take care of some of their houses, right? Things go bad and they don't know what to do about it, or they don't know who to call. They'll call the ban office. Ban office doesn't know who to call sometimes too. And it's like letting these things it's the mental struggles that we all kind of have. Like, okay, what quality and what standard do we want to live by? What did our teachers or what did our parents pass down to us? We don't know because a lot of the things that they passed down to us were just survival tactics, right? You know what I mean? And I think the reconciliation days is really just an opportunity for everybody to speak their mind in the sense of like, and not take it personally. I see that as an opportunity to just really, share information, and because I know that people will agree or disagree with actually all this reconciliation stuff, because again, there's a lot of power in being negative. They will feel there's a lot of like, not good power to say like, but not domination either. It's like most people are just thriving to feel significant. And it's the quick and easy way to do that is to shit on somebody else. Right. And it's like, it's not to say that none of us, all of us had bad lives, upbringings, but a lot of us did, and we don't understand why. And and we're only just getting better and better. So I mean, it's more or less like a mark. It's like, okay, this is what we had we could say in 20 years ago. And that set this in motion, right? So I think it's just, if we all kind of just come together and say like, my perspective doesn't agree with his perspective, but I'm okay with it. Like comfortably disagree with things, right? And I think as a home builder, and I say like, yeah, we're still repairing a lot of the damage that happened years ago, and we'll continue to repair, right? And I think coming from a home builder, that like, again, that's my favorite thing. It's like, this is all about repairing, right? Problem solving, keep going forward, right? If this is something that, is right or wrong, there is really none. And I think, the next step is like, this is just going to be information and data that, we're going to document and say like, oh, wow, this happened 20 years ago and this would happen from it. And from now on, like we still celebrate these things, right? And I want to kind of like, again, if people ask me, offer my input on the situation, then fantastic. Like I'll say what little I have to say, but I mean, within my own lane kind of thing. And I have like strong opinions on different matters, but again, I don't want to put words into people's mouths either. I want them to comfortably say, what they feel, because again, bad or good or whatever, negative, positive, it's all good information, right? Because I mean, if people are hiding how they truly feel, then we can't strategize appropriately. Right. So, I mean, again, I think it's, I don't know how it's supposed to be celebrated, what it's going to mean to the future generations. But I think, definitely making any change is positively good change sometimes, because, it's hard to say, because at least it gives us strategies, incentives, right? It's like, okay, well, that was interesting. We took a risk there. Yeah. Right. And I like calculated risks because, in some ways, like I think about people and men in general that really feel like they rise to the top quicker, it's because they take more risks typically than females sometimes, because they have to be more conservative and they have to have a lot more responsibilities most of the time. And so men will always do this, and they're like, say this is your target, right? Simon Sinek says it, and all of a sudden they hit their target. Like somehow by some freak of nature they get there, and then this other employee is steadily climbing, and then they miss the target, right? And all of a sudden this person gets promoted, and this person's like, let alone that was just a fluke. But that's kind of what we're doing here. And yeah. I think just like for people to take the chance of actually disrupting some people's attitudes is good progress sometimes, right? You're going to take some hits. You're going to take some, you're just going to have to take it with good information. Like, okay, great. And not be so afraid of the lashback kind of stuff, right? So.
Do you feel like we're on the right path? Do you feel like we are taking steps towards reconciliation? On Facebook, it often feels like we're not making progress when you talk about the Pope's speech or government institutions. Often people will comment that there's no progress being made or that we're not living up to promises. Do you personally feel like things are opening up, that there are opportunities and that we are moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I try to not take all the news seriously these days too much, but honestly, the fact that we're doing something is better than nothing. And I'm a big strategist around that, right? Like, people, again, the negativity will always be louder than the positive in a lot of ways sometimes, right? Because people will actually, it's one of those things, we're geared for that, right? It's like skiers, like, the reason why, they're going down mountains, because they're focusing on the snow. Guess what? If I go down a mountain and skis, I'm looking at the trees. I'm going to hit a tree, and you will always get to your target if you're focused on it, right? So that's what professionals focus on. They see the opportunity. They don't see the things that are in their way. And I think as entrepreneurs and business owners and leaders like yourself, that, you see opportunities, you take it, right?
I have to ask then, government institutions, government functions, band offices, municipal governments, federal governments, you were a part of your community's council. Now you're an entrepreneur. Personally, I feel like the entrepreneurs are the people who make the real change in a lot of ways. They improve our laptops, our cell phones, our houses. Those are the people that often end up making the long-term change for our community, where governments, spending, policies, they make a difference. It's not nothing, but the mindset change, the cultural change, the aspirations. There's a reason that the United States has the American dream, that they feel that every day, and people move all around the world to move there for that American dream, not for the government funding or resources or overloaded government institutions, but for that entrepreneurial dream of like, if you work hard, if you put your best foot forward, you will succeed. Do you feel like a lot of the advancements we're going to see in terms of the quality of life for Indigenous people is more likely government institutions or in entrepreneurial entrepreneurship like yourself?
I think entrepreneurship is actually huge, and I really credit people. I think the supports, and again, maybe information like this is like, you have to really have a lot of integrity to do these things, right? Like yourself, you had a goal, you have a mindset, because the typical thing is to, get an education, go and do all these things, get financial security and do that. Business, you really don't know what your path's going to be, right? You can't predict what the market's going to do. You can't predict all these things. Nobody on the planet does. Some people do really good at it. But I think, again, First Nations are really good entrepreneurs because they're self-motivated. They actually have gifts and skills, and they want to share that with people. They love being acknowledged from their community for good pieces of work, whatever it may be. If you're a carver, you develop cakes, all these things, like you love sharing that. Like that's what I think that's really ingrained in us. If I have a skill, I played soccer most of my life. And if I was, being a soccer, which I was a soccer coach to my U10 team, I loved passing that skill on. That's just something that we love doing. And then, again, like my grandma sold pies, and she's like, so-and-so is known for her pies, this and that. So I think, honestly, the next shift, it's tough to say. I don't feel like we want to rely on the government for everything anymore. I think we're definitely taking a shift in our own sort of business, but also it's having supports, maybe people who've kind of taking the risks, and that's what I kind of think too, is like, if I do this, wholeheartedly, if I put everything I got into this and some success comes out of it, mission accomplished, right? And then obviously, so that'll create because I think I've seen that now that I've kind of put I've seen a little bit of people taking, risks of their own, right? Like I'm going to start our own little business of so-and-so, and they see little logos on their trucks and stuff. And it's like, hey, cool, this is catching on, right? Take the opportunity, right? Business, there's no real criteria here, right? Like you're basically inventing this and you're regulating this. And the hard work ethic, 100% needs to have, you know what I mean? Like your success dictates how much work you want to invest in it. But again, you have to enjoy it or else it's going to kill you. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these things are really stressful, and I have to, again, regulate my emotional integrity with this all, right? Like I have to know that I got more gas in the tank to freaking like keep going. And if I'm, again, like you mentioned before, is that if I'm not taking care of myself, I'm going to take all the frustrations, stress of things not happening the way that I want them to happen out on the people closest to me. Right. And developing those support networks is super detrimental. And I know that, and that's something that I haven't built so much strength on in some ways. I have friends, family, and stuff like that to talk to. But I noticed that, you've set it up for quite well for yourself, and you have the love and support of a partner and that does those things. And again, it's, with children and family, those other kind of like facets where we could lean on for support too. But it's like, I think the community is starting to get more confidence with themselves. They want to take on, they want to set up a nail studio, they want to do these things. It's almost like, well, we need office space because honestly, First Nations have an opportunity because again, the cash flow opportunities with not having to pay taxes is huge. I took full advantage of that as much as I possibly can because it's, regardless of the taxation at the end of the year, you have the opportunity to really save yourself some cash flow during the process, right? So, and honestly, the networking that we involve ourselves in, right? Like you come from, so you live on one street, but guess what? You're connected to like 1,000 other people automatically. You could just like share, hey, I'm selling friggin' 50/50s. Boom, you got like 100 messages right off the way. That right away. Like, we're really good at, supporting, sponsoring, all these other things, right? We just love being a part of it, right? And where you don't get that sort of culture off the reserve kind of thing, right? Because that's what we have, and that's what pocket I wanted to fit into. I was like, my biggest goal here was just to create an organization that serves our people and honestly just keeps people working. Like I want to survive and I want to grow and I want to, and it turns into whatever it does, right? And it's hard, and again, provide people. And I always suggest that too with the guys that come in. It's like, hey, do you want to be your own business someday? Well, I could show you how, right? I'm not trying to lock you down here forever. If you have this, because some of them are just like really have a hard time taking direction, but they're very skilled. So I'm like, I always leave that door open. I'm like, hey, if you don't really like to have to listen to so-and-so, well, let's think about subcontracting you. How about think about getting your business license, right? Stuff like that, right? Like just put that mindset in them because, if Creek Cedar is a starting point, then they branched off and then they become their own business. And it's like, hey, I'm hiring you to do this stuff, right? Like you invoice me, sure enough, I'll pay you, right? I'm not paying you a paycheck anymore. I'm paying you, for work done, completed, right? And that's huge. And that's just creating a lot of like education within and confidence, right? I think that we need that because like this self-reliance thing on the government and organizations, great. We do need people making those conversations. We do need those mitigators and stuff like that as well. And, people sitting at like the fisheries tables, all those other stuff, right? These are very important, little ongoing everywhere. for the different breed of First Nations that we come in the next generation, I think we have a lot of creative people. We have a lot of the younger generation is very much empowered. They're very much unique thinking, kind of like, and I don't know where it came from, but I've seen a lot more control now of like the impulses, right? Because I mean, my generation partied all the time, right, and did a lot of things, and had kids at a young age. The next generation now, they're more or less very much self-propelled. They have their own and sort of own little ideas, right, and they're still figuring themselves out. COVID really took a really, I guess, interfered the development, obviously, in a lot of ways, but I think. Again, it could be bad or good. I'm not too sure. But now they're all sort of isolating amongst themselves because, I was always looking for the party, whereas now they're kind of trying to stay away from the party. It's this weird thing. It's all online stuff, right? Like that's their reality now.
Yeah.
And so, but they're also, not harming themselves some ways, right? So it's kind of what I see it happening for the next generation. And again, if with people, like yourself, that will inspire people and maybe myself to kind of give them the opportunity, the confidence to take risks, take a chance, invest their money proportionally, right? Like do it properly, not like, hey, you made $4,000 last month. Hey, let's go buy tires for your truck. How about we try to do something with that? Something funner, right? You know what I mean? Like something a little bit, let's see if we can buy, something that can actually profit off of in the long term or create more services. Up your, self-education, big thing, huge thing now. People are like offering programs, teaching things and making tons of money off it because they're sharing what they know, right? And this is, again, something that even for yourself, you could show people how to start a podcast and they'll pay you to do that, right? Like simple things like that, right? Like it's not simple. I'm sure it's super complicated, but it's it's something that I would love to do because it'd be nice to just kind of share these things and kind of update people. Cause I do also listen to tons of other podcasters, right? And it's all great information because people are very motivated in what they want to share.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like there was a technological revolution in terms of the internet connecting Indigenous communities. One of the reasons I started this was with the belief that it breaks my heart that someone on reserve might not ever think of becoming a doctor because it's not their next door neighbor. They can't just go ask, hey, how did you get into that program? Hey, what were the steps you take? What courses did you take? When did you know? How did you develop that passion? And so connecting people and making sure you can hear from lawyers, doctors, judges, accountants, people from backgrounds you might not have in your community was important to me. I'm running for chief right now of Chihuahua. Mm-hmm. I'm interested. Big challenge we're going to have is we've got a huge deficit of over $500,000 in housing. If I came to you, what solutions do you have? How do I think about housing in a different way? Because right now it's we should bug band members. And my mindset is they are never going to have over $500,000 in order to pay off the deficit. So we have to think differently about it. But a big thing is people want to live on reserve. Yeah, housing is so expensive, and to build new housing is a challenge, and to do all of this is a challenge. What are your thoughts on how Indigenous people can look at housing? How can we make sure that there is a sufficient amount?
Yeah, you know what, honestly, and that's perfect, is that, you identify the problem, right? And you understand, okay, well, that's not the only problem, right? Okay, and why was it there in the first? Because people will think automatically, well, go get $500,000, fix the houses. But guess what? 5 years, you get the same problem, right? So, and this is the research opportunity, right? You have a problem, do some research about it. And also, too, okay, you can couple this with other things. Say, you also have an employment issue. Boom, you go to the government and say, I need a grant for $150,000 to go employ a couple of people, right? And then they agree, whatever, right? So now all of a sudden you got all this labor force, right? And then you come to a contractor like myself or something that says well, you know what, I've been looking for, a project like this. Let's see what we can do. And because again, this is my contracting company. I'm not saying it's completely different than everybody else, but in a way that my goal is slightly different. Is I'm willing to work with a budget. So, providing the services, I'm and again, this is where we've tried to understand our value, right? And say, well, find out what your budget is. That's be the first thing, right? Establish your problem, find out what the budget is, and then talk to somebody like myself, whoever, that's okay, what can we do? How can we at least say you only have 300, maybe half the money, right? Well, how do we band-aid the situation so then it can start taking care of itself? So we fix half the houses, boom, we get people, and all of a sudden they start, reasonable people to actually start developing skills and actually bring more money into the situation, right? Okay, there's always strategies, right? And then again, it's just and bringing more people to the table to talk about it. And I think that's a huge thing, because put that deficit strictly on your shoulders. Really over, not, it'd be unfair. Let's say, right, hey, vote him in, he better fix this. You know what I mean? It's more or less, well, hey, no, again, those delegating ideas and responsibilities. And I think that's what you're really good at, is actually just, I think, bringing people together. That'll be the first thing, to get to a bigger picture. And then again, it's just like writing it down in a presentable way to really find more opportunities, right? And then I guess it's like doing research. What funding's out there? What is our problem, and how do we solve it? And not just band-aid it, right? And then it's like, because I know a lot of people from your community, and I've asked them, and a couple of people have asked me to build them houses too. And I'm like, so what's your situation, right? And finances, and that's the key thing too, is people don't realize your financial education is huge, right? I mean, you can't really build a business organization or anything with people who don't really understand how money works. Right. And I think that's a huge benefit of, getting a team that understands budgets. And I've been trying to do that with people in my company as well. It's like, I've been slowly introducing these things to them. Like, hey, I'm going to give you $8,000 here. Like, okay, this is how much we got for the project. Break it down. What is our materials? What is our labor costs? Right. Being mindset. And that's actually, I realize, an intellect thing too. People don't really focus on those things too much. Right? They just feel like, things are going okay, I think. And all of a sudden you got $500,000 in the hole, right? So make sure, I think, at the very beginning, that establishing the problem, right? In terms of how did that happen, right? And not pointing fingers, but like as a curious, again, stay curious, on that side of it all. But, you're going to, for something like that, if you get a budget together, and I think a lot of communities do, and like Seabird did the same thing, and, write a proposal and get the funding, to really upkeep a lot of these things, and talking to CMHC and seeing what like health will pitch in, right? And a lot of these projects that happen, like if we're, developing a whole system of apartments, and a lot of departments like partner up with each other. So health, living with housing, and then also you have recreation. So keep this in mind. So for example, if we have to build, say, a 36-unit house or apartment or whatever on the community, they put a gym in there. Hey, that's sports and rec money. Hey, we got to put a section for elders. Hey, that's elder money, right? And then now it's housing. And then, hey, there's going to be, health and stuff. So, you have all these departments, like money coming from different sides to solve one problem, right? There's always solutions. And again, it's just getting the right people into the rooms and talking about it. Like, oh, well, I have this opportunity with, the government's doing this proposal with helping underdeveloped kids, right? So, again, it's just all these pockets of people like just have to strategize and come together. But it's just having those conversations, I think, right? So, and I realized that when I worked over there is that, the departments silo themselves, and sometimes, and it's unfortunate because health is always related to housing, and it's always related to social justice, and it's all these other things too. And it's like all the departments are intertwined in a lot of ways, and we depend on like maybe one director to kind of just like get them all together in his head and like make a decision. When it's like there should be huge amounts of communication between the people that are in charge of making these running these budgets, because like people, and again I mentioned, I try to give, say, a budget to one of my guys, and like he feels like he's responsible for spending it. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. And, you do the job to a good standard, and then if there's leftovers, fantastic, we push it towards any other projects that may cost us money. Right? You know what I mean? Like just circling these, there's always weird little financial loopholes, I guess you could say, and pockets of funding that all of a sudden accumulate into a really extensive, useful amount, right? Like if I took this, I got 6 projects going on, I took little pockets of revenue, and all of a sudden I could purchase a truck that will help the company in the future. Like that's great, right? And that's the whole idea. It's just like kind of just isolating your budgets, right? Look, what do we have? What do we have access to, right? Having all that stuff. But if that was something that would be confronted with me, like, yeah, I would love to just kind of sit down and see what our options are, right? And again, it's just having those people at the table that really are just looking at the bigger picture of things. Like, how do we solve this? Because again, you bring problem solvers, not money makers. Those types of things, right? So, and that's the huge exchange, like, and that's super beneficial for, not trying to sell you on it. Like for a company that's developing too, that's a hook. Say, hey, we helped Chihuahua get out of this and that, and that's great, and that's good for my reputation. Same thing, I've given loyalties to people who've helped me at the beginning, and I have, my neighbors were my first clients, and a couple other people, you know what I mean? And I've offered them free services since then. And, Scouts is one of the first investors, kind of thing with me that say like, okay, well, again, like I said, I did a couple jobs for them for at cost and I didn't make any money off it, but I was just really trying to build relationships and say that I was honest, right? And that's really hard to do, is to build a reputation with people, build trust, right? And that would be the hugest thing for you to do, is how do you find people that you can trust to do this work? Because again, you have to delegate those responsibilities to somebody who knows how to do the work, and you have to have those meetings with them. Like, hey, I don't know, I don't got a good feeling about this guy, and it's because feeling's everything. We're emotional beings, right? Our intuition is built on everything, right? It's like, I could write you a book, a report, and say this is what Creek Cedar is about. But until you meet me, until you actually sit down and we have these conversations, you have no idea who I am.
Yeah, that's one of the big challenges. I just had someone reach out and kind of go, well, you're not involved in very many family events, like community, family more events. And it was like, fair enough, like in terms of me running for chief. And they were like, they feel very skeptical in regards to my leadership because of that, because they're like, how do we know? And it's like, first of all, I'm open to attending anything that you would like me to attend. I've never been invited, and I don't think it's my job to go and bother you to figure out why I'm not being invited. That's your call on whether or not you think I'd be a good guest. So there's that piece. For me, it's like, I think I bring a background in policy, how to lead a community. I think I also bring like external relationships. I think I know how to communicate with people, sit down, figure out where we can work together, and be humble and know I don't have all the answers. The best I can do is bring the best people in, sit down with them, and figure out what we can do from there. And that is, I think, the role of any good leader. The challenge I think my community has right now is we're not partnering externally with anyone. We're completely focused on our internal mechanisms, our internal squabbles. And so if you came up to the door and knocked and said, hey, do you guys need any help? We wouldn't even be able to focus on that, because we're so focused on what's going on with all of our portfolios that we're not thinking like, well, who are the movers and shakers outside of our community that we can partner with to get things done? And I think that's hopefully what my ability would be, to sit down and go, okay, how do we do this? How do we do a garrison style design in our community where we're planning the whole community to come together? Because that's the big challenge, is like, we build a house, but there's no sidewalks, and Seabird's kicking our ass right now. And I'm a competitive person. I love what Seabird's doing, and I want my community to have that. I'm like, I see the sidewalks coming in, I see all of the backyard developments way in the back area, and I'm like, this is good. This is what you want. You want the feeling of sidewalks and lights and safety and community and people walking their kids down the road. You want that sense of security. You don't want to be like, is this safe? Is there a bear out there? You want like some sense of security and some sense of like logical community development. And that's what I see Garrison has, is like, it all makes sense. The back areas make sense. Everything was pre-designed of like, this is how it's going to be designed. It wasn't like, this house is going to be kind of like this, and then we'll put an apartment next to it, and then we'll put townhouses next to it. And like, whoa, what was the long-term plan here? That's why zoning can be so valuable, is because if you zone everything properly and you go, we want to do 100 residential places here, we want people to have rentals in the back, like whatever it is, but you want it to all kind of come together. And I think that first, it's like community consultation. What does the community want? Then let's go implement that. Let's bring about housing so people are proud of where they live. And I see Skowlook doing those 5, I don't know if you've seen them, they're right near the Indigenous Bloom, but they have like 5 houses, but they're all like sectioned off. I think that that's like a very affordable way to kind of get people started who don't have housing right now or who are living homeless. And like, how do we do this so we're happy with our results? Yeah,
I think actually like it's very useful. And I think you've interviewed plenty of leaders, and they, keeping that humility is key. And, understanding, de-weaponize them. And that sounds bad, but it's like, yeah, no, I didn't grow up around here. No, I don't have kids or whatever. Like, you just kind of take their weapons away from them. But again, I'm willing to have these conversations, right? And it's like, I'm going to offer this, and this, and this, and I'm willing to learn this, and this, right? And it's like, and it's great because, it's really hard to keep you cool when people are confronting you with these things. Like, no, I fully acknowledge it, again, but I respect and honor the family culture, right? And just, I'm willing to learn and sit down. I'm willing, and that's the hugest things, because people always assume in leadership that you have all the answers. I'm like, no, I'm just willing to figure them out, right? And it's like, and that's kind of And that's sort of the philosophy that I try to keep myself. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but I know that I have the capacity to figure it out, right? And as if you're disrupted by certain things, well, let me know. Again, it's all information. And if it's very important to you, then I'll figure it out, right? And again, it's like, okay, because people want to buy into the type of person you are, to one thing, right? And how useful you are, right? And we all want to be really useful. And I think, like, we all come with barriers. Like, so again, my benefit of when I was in politics, getting elected, like I, surprisingly did really well, and I still have to make amends for those kind of my decisions to step back and not finish the term. But I felt like I had a bigger purpose in terms of I learned as much as I did there, and now I still want to contribute to the community in a different way, right? And I think, just you doing this, spending countless hours like setting these things up and interviewing really, people that actually have a lot to offer, right? You're already giving back in a lot of ways. And this is just like, on your own steam in a lot of ways, right? And, and that's huge. And that speaks a lot to, speaks volumes of what your intentions are with the people. And it's like, and especially in politics, you're 24/7, right? You've interviewed people like, Michael, Dave, and, Derek. I've heard a couple of those guys, and I know them personally. And then, a couple of my family members. So you're not afraid of a challenge. And I think that's probably the biggest thing you can kind of show these people, right? It's like, it's a challenge, but I'm not afraid of it. I'll figure it out. and then just have that really impactful way to expressing it. But yeah, land use plans, people want to see these. And I know when I'm not too familiar with Tuatha, but also, yes, you guys got all these, what I really strongly believe in politics is that, we silo each community, which is the government strategy anyway, boom, 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 pocket everybody. But it's like, if we had this sort of like, one monthly Zoom meeting with each of the leaders and like at least 5 communities, like so many problems could get solved quicker. Like we're all doing the same work and we're not, you know what I mean? We're spending the same amount of money, where it could be like a 10-minute phone call with somebody from Czech and like, how did you do this? Oh, okay, sweet. Boom, thousands of dollars saved there, right? Like we're not wasting resources and energy, like trying to solve something that somebody did last year. You know what I mean? So communication, huge. And like, and also like that humility that you have, like, hey, Seabirds, how did you get this? And you can call me, whoever's in the lands department. Like, what did you do? And they should be willing to answer those questions, right? Like, where did you go? And it's like, but I think, again, each community is their own individual in a lot of ways. And so, what you may seem Seabird has beneficial, like we're also lacking in the other areas, right? The Tuatha is very, so again, it's that trading of information, right? So you got to figure out what your assets are and what are your pros and cons and what you want from each other. Trading this information is huge, and it saves a lot of time. Again, especially like you said, just keeping that humility and saying like, and that's what I realized in politics, that we don't meet with other communities very often. The most rewarding times I've had were Jamie Starrett and stuff like that, when we've actually had governmental development classes where we broke up into focus groups, and it's like we actually just shared little tidbits about what were going on in our community. And it was during COVID, so we're like sitting there like, oh, does this person say this? Like, it's very similar. So we're all meeting, trying to figure out these problems, isolate ourselves in our own little community. But every community is talking about it, right? And some of this, there's just weird, and they all have really good ideas to how to get to the moment. Like, Chehalis is doing this, Seabird's doing this, Cham's doing this, like all the same problems. I mean, just Cove, for example. But I mean, it would take 5 minutes, and then we'd all come like, oh, share each other's ideas or email each other like, hey, this is what Chehalis is doing, Cham doing, boom. Have this network, right? But it just doesn't seem to happen a lot of the times. Yeah. So, but I mean, I did this informally because, well, this is where I mentioned I played a lot of soccer. I connect with people all the time through sports, right? So, my coach was from Chehalis, and I have another one from Skowitz, and I have like players from Chackton. I played with Derek and Tyler and all these other guys, and I have all these players, and we come together and we just bullshit, right? And then we talk about what's going on, and we talk about politics, we talk about this, and it's like that's where we congregate, right? In the level of sport, and it's just a multifaceted kind of thing, and we all have each other's ideas, and it's all off the record, of course, and it's like those are where real conversations and useful ideas come from, right? It's just kind of like when it's not. There's no minutes, right? There's no this, there's no that. It's no there's not in a boardroom. They're just at places where people are being themselves, and they're very passionate about the work they do, right? So I think you've already developed yourself like a really good social network, especially with doing all these things that now you have this like list of all these people in your contacts that you could ask any second of the day of like certain things, right? Because you've developed really strong relationships with them, right?
Yeah, that is the trip, is like how I just sat down with Andrew Victor and he was like, we used to talk to Chihuahua, and it's like, how do we not talk? We have the same problems. Like we need to be meeting to go over these things and figure out how we can do things better, and thinking about like, what strategy did you use? Oh, that was a problem, and like things arose there. But also just pooling and working collaboratively where we can make that make sense of like, we all have our own like finance managers. Well, how about we get one really qualified person to try and carry on more, and then make sure they have the admin staff to manage it? Like, why can't we collaborate more in those regards? And I know there's hesitations with that, because when one community gets more money, then other communities go like, well, we feel underserved, we feel undervalued. So there's like, you have to put in mechanisms to kind of prevent that feeling of like, oh, why are they always over there? Why are they so hard to get a hold of? So there's challenges with that, but I think there's tons of opportunities to like overcome that if we all get together. And that's, I agree, the big challenge is like, we've been taught like we need to do our own thing and be separate, and it's like, it really slows us down, because we can't even hear about, how did you address that? Okay, that community addressed it that way, that community addressed it this way. And so I think that's a valuable next step. Can you tell people how they can connect with your business, how they can follow you online? I love that you have your staff members on your website, highlighting them, showing them the value they bring to your organization. Can you tell people how they can connect?
Yeah, and so they got the Facebook page, and again, it hasn't been updated recently, and also at Creek Cedar Contracting on Facebook as well. My website is creekcedar.com, and again, there's a link on there too, and you can email me. It goes straight to my inbox. But again too, and I got my guys roaming around. Just, I told them all the time, as like, anybody approaches you, give them a card, talk to them really friendly, right, and forward them my number. And again, it's it's my contact in there until things change. But for the most part, yeah, it's a lot of word of mouth too. And you've sent me some information about e-commerce grants and stuff like that, and I just I've really hesitant sometimes. Like, you never want to get too big too fast, but again, I've always never shy away from it. I have a hard time turning down work, but and again too, it's like in the capacity of changing and growing the business, I would love to have people more interested in working with us and also hiring us too, right? Like, and that's what I meant to. So again, if you're looking for work, if you're obviously have projects that you want us to be a part of, and just to talk, talking's free. And again, you can call the number, email, all that stuff that's on the website. It's all right to me. And then, I'm assuming after this, might get a couple of interesting clients that come some offers for us. But that's probably the best way to do it.
Awesome. I have really enjoyed this. I was so excited after our first conversation. I was like, this needs to be a podcast episode, because you are passionate in a way that so many people lose that spark in the first year. So many people get jaded, frustrated with bureaucracy, with people not showing up, people not always paying what they need to pay. People can get bitter and resentful and think, I tried to do good, and what a waste of my time to try. And your mindset of like, okay, like that's them. I'm going to keep moving forward. The philosophy is good, but they're not there yet. And that's okay. That's life. Not everybody's going to be ready for that. There's only 25% who are ready to make that big step. But I think your philosophy has not been well implemented outside of the tourism industry, outside of shops and restaurants that people are used to, where they kind of expect maybe that philosophy of giving back and trying to support the community. Your ethos seems so different than anything I've ever heard, and it's why I wanted to sit down with you, is because I think we're lucky that you're trying this. I think you set the example for other people to think, how can I find whatever I'm doing, whether it's electrical, plumbing, whether it's starting a clothing line, whether it's whatever it is, how can I make this have a positive impact that causes the individual to improve, it causes the community to improve, it causes me to improve, and it causes others who hear about it to want to improve. Like, that's a very challenging endeavor to take on, but so worthwhile, and something that I think is so unique and so important. So it's been an honor to sit down with you to be able to talk about these things, because I think that they're just so inspiring.
Right. Appreciate that. Thank you.